Regretfully, Dian Dian, Shiyu, and Shangliu Li were in low spirits at this moment, so no one gave Xianxia an explanation about what sort of treasure the boundless world mirror was. However, even then, Xianxia was still able to determine that even though existences at the Immortal King realm seemed as if they hadn't met each other, yet they actually executed various abilities in order to scheme against and compete with each other. Obviously, based on the current circumstances, Shiyu and the others were a step behind, and the Sovereign Sex group had entered the God Attainment region before them. There's no time to lose. We must take action as soon as possible because everything would be too late if they arrive at the God Attainment altar before us. Shiyu frowned as he spoke. I presume both of you are aware. Once we enter the God Attainment region, the laws of the Heaven Tao and energy of karma within there won't be in our control any longer. Since the ancient times until now, most of the immortal kings that enter have perished, and only a mere small portion of immortal kings were able to obtain the secret to attaining the Tao and becoming a god. Dian Dian's clear eyes were suffused with a heavy expression as she said slowly, under such circumstances, it can be said that our lives are on the line and killing intent is lying in ambush all around us. So in my opinion, it's better if we act carefully, and we shouldn't allow the sovereign sect to disrupt our plans. I agree with Dian Dian's opinion. This time, the prehistoric ruins has become the place where the upheaval of the three dimensions begins, and the God Attainment region that has been silent through the years has emerged once more into the world. Can be said that fortune and disaster come hand in hand. Even though those bastards from the sovereign sect might have entered before us, they may not necessarily be able to avoid the danger and killing intent within it. Shangliu Li spoke in a light voice, and her fair and smooth forehead flickered with a glow of wisdom. So after we enter the God Attainment region, the most important thing for us is to arrive safely at the God Attainment altar first, and it's not to concentrate on scheming and going against the Sovereign Sex group. The principle behind this was very simple, so Shiyu naturally understood as well. He pondered for a moment before he said, "Then it's decided." All of them immediately didn't hesitate to act. They flashed through the deathly silent sea of blood and went through the two enormous bronze doors that towered into the sky, and they vanished without a trace. Swish! Right when they just left, a wave of lightning suddenly trembled violently in space, and then a tall and robust figure appeared out of thin air. Damn it! It actually opened up beforehand. Master really didn't deceive me. It's filled with variables this time, and the greater the fortune, the greater the tribulation. But if that little fellow entered, then I won't be able to pull him back out. This person was Heaven Trampler. His eyes stared at the two enormous bronze doors at the center of the sea of blood, and his rugged and ferocious face couldn't help but reveal a wisp of worry. Alas, never mind. I've already fucking waited for so many years. If I'm still unable to become a god, then living will truly be too boring. In the end, he sighed once more and stamped his feet before he transformed into a wisp of dark lightning once more, and he swiftly entered through the door that led to the God Attainment region. This was a vast expanse of space that was suffused with chaotic mist, and there were countless enormous stars floating about, causing it to be like a chaotic universe. When Xianxia saw this scene before his eyes clearly, his heart couldn't help but be fiercely shocked. This was absolutely not the starry sky in the universe, yet it wasn't any different. It was completely filled with chaotic chi, and not only were there countless stars in space, there were even expanse after expanse of floating masses of land, divine mountains, and rivers. Every single floating mass of land lay across countless stars, and it was unbelievably enormous. The numerous divine mountains seemed as if they stood towering within the universe, and they were lofty and vast. The rivers surged violently through the starry sky, and it was like the river of fate that flowed for eternity. It was grand. It was boundless. It was suffused with chaotic chi. All of this exceeded Xianxia's imagination. This was the God Attainment region, an expanse of a mysterious and boundless space, and place of fortune that had drawn over countless immortal kings since the beginning of the prehistoric times to search for the path to becoming a god. At the same time, Xianxia noticed that all the floating stars, masses of land, and divine mountains were growing with numerous precious divine herbs. They emanated strands of divine radiance and were enveloped with a layer of chaotic chi while they emanated glows of all sorts of colors. Divine radiance filled the sky, and they were filled with matchless temptation. However, there was no lack of strands of terrifying auras suffused amongst them. Obviously, the expanse of boundless space was filled with all sorts of killing intent, and it was extremely dangerous. Rumble. Right when thoughts were flying swiftly through Xianxia's mind, a terrifying aura surged over from a distant star. It covered the heavens and the earth as it enveloped over. Surprisingly, it was an extremely enormous flying beast. Its wings blotted out the sky and covered an area of over 50,000 kilometers, and its eyes were like two crimson-red and enormous stars. A dark rock hawk, a primeval variant beast that swallowed the essence of the heavens and the earth and excreted netheresium water. Xianxia couldn't help but be astounded in his heart when he saw this dark rock hawk appear. We encountered such a terrifying primeval ferocious beast right after we entered? What sort of terrifying existences reside within the depths of this god attainment region? Nice! A dark rock hawk. Even though it has died for countless years, its soul still remains, and it can be utilized as a superb divine material. Swish! Suddenly, Shiryu moved through the air and stretched out his hand before grabbing fiercely. A shapeless hand tore through the sky and enveloped an entire area of over 50,000 kilometers. And it actually instantaneously captured the dark rock hawk. Bang! Unfortunately, before Shiryu could subdue it, the dark rock hawk suddenly let out a cry that shot into the sky. Its enormous figure rumbled as it blazed with surging black flames, and then it exploded into pieces. Rumble! Once the beast perished, the black flames that covered its entire body raged through space like a torrent, and it shattered countless stars before vanishing into nothingness. Shiryu wasn't surprised by this, and a wisp of a smile appeared on the corners of his mouth instead, because he'd already extracted the strand of the dark rock hawk's soul that still remained, and he'd sealed it up. On the other hand, Xianxia finally understood that the dark rock hawk he saw earlier was still an ancient blood god corpse. However, based on its appearance, its strength was obviously much more formidable than the ancient blood god corpses on Godslaughter Bloodlands. I'll be keeping this thing, and once we enter the region and encounter other treasures, I'll distribute it to everyone else, said Shiryu with a smile. Dian and Xiangliu smiled and nodded, whereas Xianxia naturally had no objections. Come, we'll probably encounter numerous restrictions of the gods, ancient blood god corpses, and some terrifying and dangerous existences all along the way. We must be careful. Shiryu seemed to have studied everything about the god attainment region before coming here, and he briefly sized up his surroundings before he led Xianxia and the others towards the depths of the space before them. According to Shiryu, the god attainment altar was at the center of the god attainment region, and the legendary secret to attaining the Tao and becoming a god was hidden on the god attainment altar. However, it wasn't easy to arrive there, because this expanse of boundless space was filled with chaotic chi that concealed karma and the energy of the heaven Tao, causing immortal kings to be unable to deduce any signs or luck. Since the beginning of the prehistoric times, countless immortal kings had stepped foot into the god attainment region, yet practically more than half had fallen on this journey, and only a mere small group of immortal kings had arrived before the god attainment altar. So this journey was called Immortal King's Burial. This meaning was obvious. It naturally meant that even immortal kings would perish here if they were careless and encountered danger. All along the way, their speed forward wasn't swift. Naturally, it was in comparison because in Xianxia's opinion, Shiryu and the other speed was comparable to teleportation at this moment. Throughout this entire process, they'd passed by numerous enormous stars, floating masses of land, and towering and lofty divine mountains. However, they didn't stop at any of these places. Even though these places were covered in numerous extraordinarily rare immortal herbs and immortal materials, existences at the immortal king realm like Shiryu and the others weren't interested in ordinary treasures any longer. So they naturally didn't attach any importance to all of this. On the other hand, even though Xianxia was extremely tempted by the numerous treasures that he noticed all along the way, he was clearly aware that their objective was the god attainment altar, and it was impossible for them to specially provide him time to gather treasures. Just like this, they flew for the time an entire incense stick took to burn. Suddenly, Shuryu, who led the way ahead, stopped, and it was at this moment that an extremely lofty divine mountain in the distance actually moved abruptly at this moment. When Xianxia looked carefully, there was surprisingly numerous 300 m tall ancient blood god corpses beneath the divine mountain. There was around over 10,000 of them. All of them wore bronze armor, while their exposed skin was already dried up since a long time ago. Moreover, their muscles had withered a long time ago as well, yet it was hard like eternal rocks. Their divine might still remained, and it was deep like an abyss. When looked at from afar, it was like a primeval army in bronze armor, and the divine mountain was surprisingly being carried on their shoulders. An army of ancient blood god corpses that had fallen during the prehistoric times, and they were carrying on their shoulders a divine mountain that towered into space. Such a scene was simply world-shocking. Especially terrifying to Xianxia was that there was actually a mighty figure that was an entire 3 kilometers tall and suffused with a chaotic aura sitting cross-legged on the divine mountain. Even though Xianxia couldn't see the figure's appearance clearly, merely the terrifying, imposing aura emanated from the figure was more than 100 times more terrifying than the other ancient blood god corpses. An ancient immortal king's corpse. I never expected that we would still encounter such an existence. Shuryu's expression instantly became heavy. He was very clearly aware that the figure sitting cross-legged on the mountain was formed from a corpse of an immortal king that fell in the god attainment region, and it was much more terrifying than the other ancient blood god corpses. There's a difference in strength even between ancient immortal king corpses. This one before our eyes probably possesses a might at the intermediate stage of the immortal king realm, so it can't be considered to be difficult to deal with. I can deal with it by myself. Xianxia spoke slowly, and she didn't seem to be nervous at all. Their path ahead had been completely obstructed by the divine mountain, and if they wanted to pass through, then they couldn't avoid a battle. End it quickly. We can't stay here for too long, otherwise others might seize this opportunity. Miss Midnight, you take care of Brother Xianxia. Junior Sister Li, and I will deal with that ancient immortal king corpse. Sure, you had a murderous and decisive disposition, and he immediately made a decided rumble. However, before they could act, another 3 more divine mountains actually appeared out of thin air from the distance, and they respectively pressed down from the other 3 directions. At this instant, for divine mountains resided in all 4 directions, and the divine mountains actually completely locked down their paths of escape. The divine mountains tore through the sky and arrived here with an extraordinarily heavy, imposing aura, and they resided in all 4 directions to completely block off their paths of retreat. Just like the divine mountain they saw earlier, the other 3 divine mountains were respectively carried by over 1,300 m tall ancient blood god corpses, whereas each divine mountain had an ancient immortal king corpse residing atop it. This scene was too sudden, and it caused the expressions of Shuryu and the others to change slightly. Such a force was sufficient to be a threat to them. The situation isn't good. We seem to have fallen into an ambush. Divine flames flowed with Shuryu's eyes as they blinked, and his entire body erupted with dazzling and blazing divine radiance. The appearance of such a scene was too strange, and it seemed as if it had been waiting for them since a long time ago, causing them to feel a trace of uneasiness in their hearts. As for the dense mass of ancient blood god corpses and the 4 ancient immortal king corpses, they didn't give these 3 immortal kings much pressure because they could safely escape this encirclement by fighting for a while. The only thing that worried them was whether all of this was an ambush that had been planned since the beginning. This path towards the god attainment altar is called the Immortal King's Burial. Since we're clearly aware of it, then the sovereign sect is probably clearly aware as well, and it's entirely possible that they entered beforehand and laid an ambush here. Xianxia spoke swiftly as she circulated her cultivation, and her entire body was enveloped beneath the dreamlike and illusory 9-clarity divine light. However, the only thing that puzzles me is how could the sovereign sect possibly control these ancient immortal king corpses? Dian Diane's beautiful brows knit together slightly, while her beautiful eyes were suffused with a piercingly cold divine light. A formation. This time it was Xianxia that answered him instead. After he recovered from his shock, he instantly determined that the location of these 4 divine mountains fitted together closely and perfectly, and it had enveloped and completely locked down the surroundings while they cooperated with each other from a distance to form a complete whole. This was what was visible on the surface, so sure you and the others were able to determine this as well. However, the formation Chen she mentioned wasn't this, and it was instead a wave of fluctuations from a formation outside the four divine mountains. Even though it was shapeless and immaterial, how could it possibly escape his eyes? The current situation was that the formation that enveloped them from outside was the source that controlled everything before them. When they heard Chen Shi's explanation, Sure Yu and the others practically instantly came to an understanding, and their faces sank. Doesn't this mean that even if we annihilate all these corpses before us, we might still suffer the attacks of others? Kill! 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 Right when Chen Shi and the others were swiftly deducing the situation, a wave of loud shouts that shook the heavens suddenly resounded. It was completed in an orderly manner and seemed like the shouts of fiend gods, and it resounded at the same time while a murderous and blood aura shook the surroundings. Rumble! Beneath the four divine mountains, row after row of ancient blood god corpses in bronze armor moved out. They tore through space as they shot over explosively from all directions. In an instant, the entire heavens and earth had transformed into a sea of blood, and boundless baleful chi surged through the air, while they emanated a terrifying aura that almost incinerated the heavens and the earth. This scene was truly too terrifying. Chen Shi felt that if he was all alone here, then he probably didn't have to struggle at all before directly being annihilated. Fortunately, he wasn't alone. Bang! A wisp of pale white and vast sword chi shot into the sky. It contained the supreme immortal king laws and seemed like a blame that could tear the sky apart as it swept towards the surroundings. We can't hesitate any longer. Let's kill them first. At the same time, Sure Yu let out a long howl while his long hair fluttered, and his entire body was matchlessly dazzling. He was like a peerless monarch, and he tore through the sky with the god mystery sword in hand. Then I'll trouble senior brother Sure Yu to deal with 2 ancient immortal king corpses, while I and Miss Midnight will each deal with 1. As for the remaining ancient blood god corpses, it wouldn't be late to annihilate them later. Xianxia spoke swiftly while her beautiful face surged with a proud, mighty, and emotionless expression at this moment. She flicked her sleeve lightly before her figure had already charged onto one of the divine mountains. That's for the best. Dian Dian moved out as well. Of course, she brought Chen Shi along with her. She did this because she was worried that misfortune might befall Chen Shi. After all, Chen Shi was currently weak like an ant in a battle of such level, and only a single ancient blood god corpse would be sufficient to easily take his life. Rumble! The terrifying battle erupted with a bang. Divine radiance erupted while a bloody and baleful aura shot into the sky. It caused the heavens and the earth to tremble and dim down, and it was like they'd fallen into the final calamity that was the end of the world. This was a battle between immortal kings. With a wave of the hand, the heavens and the earth were overturned, the sun and moon fell, and the stars shattered. If it was in the outside world, then even an entire continent might be instantly obliterated. When facing a battle of such a level, Chen Shi had completely lost all his senses, and all he felt was an expanse of piercing pain. He couldn't sense anything, and he could only feel that his body was ceaselessly moving and soaring along with Dian Dian. This caused him to be extremely shocked in his heart. He didn't dare imagine how miserable the situation he was in would be if these 3 immortal kings weren't present here. At the same time, 50,000 kilometers away from where this battle erupted, was a few figures that were enveloped in divine halos and possessed supremely arrogant bearings. There was a total of 4 people. However, they seemed like the rulers of the heavens and the earth. As they stood there casually, they naturally emanated a kingly air that looked down upon all living beings and commanded the world. These 4 people were exactly Void Heaven Sex Lu Qianqiu, Myriad Sex Bei Haolang, and the Sovereign Sex Suiren Ting and Zhang Lingxiao that were respectively ranked at the 2nd and 5th amongst the 7 elite disciples of the Sovereign Sect. Every single one of them was in existence at the Immortal King realm. The Sovereign Sect's 9 Heaven Calamity Dao Annihilation Divine Formation really is extraordinary. It's actually capable of utilizing the energy of calamity to control the ancient blood god corpses. "It's simply indescribably brilliant," said Lu Qianqiu. He had gray hair, a benevolent and kind appearance, and he held a glittering green bamboo cane. As he spoke, his words were rather filled with flattery towards Ting and Jiang Lingxiao. "It's nothing great. I only hope that it's able to annihilate that midnight Immortal King and Nuwas Dao Palace's Yu and Li. Then our operation this time will definitely go smoothly and unhindered." Ting spoke indifferently. His hair was crimson red like fire while he had an extremely handsome appearance, and he wore a Taoist robe that was fiery red like blood. He seemed like a king of fire that controlled all flames in the world. He was a descendant of the primeval tribe, the Swerin clan, and his body flowed with the bloodline of the gods. Coupled with his status as the second-ranked elite disciple of the sovereign sect, it caused every single word of his to be filled with a commanding, mighty, and supreme imposing aura. "Ha ha! Fellow Taoist, you're being modest." Lu Qianqiu roared with laughter, and his attitude was rather fervent. Ting glanced at him, and then he frowned and sighed. "It's just a pity." Lu Qianqiu was stunned. "What's a pity?" Even though this 9-heaven calamity Tao annihilation divine formation has been set up and the fish have entered the net, there's still a trace of a flaw causing it to be impossible for it to attain perfection. It was Jiang Lingxiao that answered him. She wore plain clothes while her hair was coiled up into a simple bun, and her appearance was delicate and pretty. As she spoke, the corners of her mouth always carried a trace of a smile, and it caused others to unconsciously have a good impression of her. "What flaw?" Lu Qianqiu frowned. Ting glanced at him with deep meaning. "You really want to know?" At this instant, Lu Qianqiu's heart constricted for no reason, and his entire body emanated a trace of a terrified aura that couldn't be restrained. This caused his expression to change, and he forced out a smile. "If it's something I shouldn't know, then it's fine if fellow Taoist doesn't tell me." He secretly decided in his heart that once they entered the God Attainment Altar, he would definitely instantly separate himself from these emotionless monsters of the sovereign sect. Otherwise, he wouldn't even realize before his death arrived. "Since you've asked, then how could I not tell you?" Ting smiled lightly, yet his smile was completely indifferent and emotionless. Along with his voice, a black and ancient jade pagoda suddenly floated up into appearance, and it enveloped down towards Lu Qianqiu. This scene occurred too quickly and suddenly. Coupled with Ting's strength being firmly superior to Lu Qianqiu, it instantly caught Lu Qianqiu by surprise at this moment. Before Lu Qianqiu could make any reaction, his entire body was already enveloped by the jade pagoda. "Fellow Taoist Swerin, what are you doing? Damn it! You actually intend to kill me to keep me silent? Damn it! Your sovereign sect really does change its attitude frequently. You're a bunch of cruel, unscrupulous, and emotionless animals." Lu Qianqiu's shocked and furious voice emanated out as he roared without end. This sudden scene caused the expression of the master of the myriad sect, Bei Haolang, who stood at the side to turn grim and reveal extreme terror while he stared at Ting with disbelief. This fellow intends to kill an immortal king like Lu Qianqiu merely because of a single question? Rumble! Before Bei Haolang could recover from his shock, the black and ancient jade pagoda suddenly erupted with an enormous jet-black glow, and it rumbled as it circulated before emanating an extremely terrifying radiance of divinity. After that, a shrill cry, that of impending death that was extremely miserable, resounded out, and then it fell to silence. Lu Qianqiu, an immortal king, was actually crushed to death. Swoosh! Bei Haolang's reaction was extremely swift when he saw this. He didn't ask Ting about the reason for Ting's actions at all before his figure flashed, and he transformed into a wisp of a black shadow that fled towards the distance. How could he not be aware that it was impossible for him to survive once Lu Qianqiu had died? He didn't dare arouse any hope at all when facing the emotionless bastards from the sovereign sect. "Fellow Taoist, don't you want to know what the trace of a flaw is?" However, Bei Haolang's heart sank before his path was obstructed by Jiang Lingxiao as soon as he made a move. She had a trace of a smile on the corners of her mouth, and it seemed to be a gentle smile. Yet when it entered into his eyes, it was completely indifferent and emotionless. It was like she was staring at a corpse. In an instant, Bei Haolang's expression became extremely unsightly. He forced out a stiff smile as he said, "I have urgent matters to attend to, so I won't disturb fellow Taoists any longer." As he spoke, a wisp of a ruthless expression suddenly flashed through his eyes. His entire body rumbled as it emanated a large expanse of black-colored baleful mist, and then he stretched out his hands. His hands tore through space as they struck fiercely towards Zhang Lingxiao's throat. This space had locked down space and time, and it was extremely ruthless. However, Zhang Lingxiao didn't seem to have moved when a terrifying and powerful force suddenly enveloped down towards him, and it caused Bei Haolang's figure to stiffen and seem as if it had been frozen. After that, he saw a black and ancient jade pagoda envelop him completely. Rumble. The black jade pagoda glowed while the body of the pagoda actually became crimson red like blood. As it activated, waves of shrill and miserable cries sounded out from it. But it wasn't long before everything fell into silence once more. At this point, another immortal king had been crushed on the spot. If this scene were to be spread to the outside world, then it would definitely stir the three dimensions. But to Swearin Ting and Zhang Lingxiao, it was like they'd completed an insignificant matter, and their expressions were indifferent, emotionless, and calm. We utilized the lives of two immortal kings as sacrifice. This time, it's sufficient to kill those fellows, right? Amidst his cold and indifferent voice, Swearin Ting's gaze looked over far into the distance. At the end of his gaze, a fierce battle was still going on. Swish! Swish! As he spoke, Swearin Ting flicked his sleeve, and the ancient and black jade pagoda revolved. Strands of bright golden blood of immortal kings surged out from within it, and it transformed into a river that shot through the sky. The golden blood contained strands of immortal king laws and emanated a terrifying and monstrous imposing aura. And when it converged into a river, it was bright like a brilliant scorching sun that illuminated the ages. It was a horrifying sight. This blood came from the two immortal kings, Lu Qianqiu and Bei Haolang. Earlier, they were the masters of two prehistoric sects, the Exalt and a sect, yet now they'd instantly lost their lives at the hands of Swearin Ting. Moreover, even if they'd perished, their bodies, soul, blood, and cultivation had been completely made into an offering. It was simply extraordinarily sad. These were the methods of the sovereign sect. Emotionless, cruel, and stopping at nothing to achieve their objective. Rumble. As he watched the bright golden blood river of immortal kings transform into a ray of light that traversed the boundless space and surged into the nine-heaven calamity Tao annihilation divine formation that he'd set up a long time ago, Swearin Ting heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. Luckily, we had the assistance of the Overlord Sage Path Pagoda this time. Otherwise we'd have to exhaust some hard work in order to kill those two fellows, said Swearin Ting with a smile. It was only two idiots whose Tao hearts had been fooled by greed. As soon as they heard they could become gods, they were instantly reduced to our pawns. They truly are pitiable. Zhang Lingxiao spoke with disdain. After that, her beautiful brows knit together slightly. However, senior brother Swearin, even though the nine-heaven calamity Tao annihilation divine formation received the offering of the lives of two immortal kings, it still is slightly insufficient to annihilate Yu and the others. Don't worry, junior sister. Before we came to the prehistoric ruins this time, Master deduced the treasures Nuwas Dao Palace would prepare. So he especially allowed me to carry the boundless world mirror. Swearin Ting's expression was covered in pride and confidence. Presently, I've already placed this divine artifact within the divine formation, so annihilating three existences at the immortal king realm is as easy as turning over my palm. What we have to do now is wait silently for the outcome. When he spoke up to hear, his eyes suddenly surged with a trace of a burning glow. At that time, the various treasures in their possessions will be ours. Ha ha ha. As he finished speaking, he was unable to restrain himself from roaring with laughter. Zhang Lingxiao puckered her lips and chuckled without end as well, and her bearing became even more gentle and modest. However, her starry eyes were completely indifferent and emotionless. After an unknown period of time, When Xianxia recovered his senses, the battle had already calmed down. In his field of vision, blood corpses, blood, skeletons, and shattered expanses of space floated about all over the surroundings. The violent spatial turbulence was recovering its calm. Yet the blood and murderous aura that covered the heavens and the earth couldn't be eliminated in a short period of time. It has ended. The few tens of thousands of ancient blood god corpses and the 4 ancient immortal king corpses have all been annihilated? Xianxia opened his eyes wide, and he still didn't dare believe the scene before his eyes. Logically speaking, he should feel happy. Yet when his gaze descended onto Dian Dian, Shiyu, and Shangliu Li, his heart jerked instead, because their expressions were extremely heavy at this moment, and it was even more grim than it was before the battle. Moreover, the space between their brows was covered in a heavy expression. Could it be that the battle hasn't ended? Right, it hasn't. In next to no time, Xianxia noticed that even though the ancient corpses had been wiped out, the 4 divine mountains still floated in the surroundings. Moreover, the damaged corpses, scarlet red blood, and piles of bones that covered the sky hadn't dispersed at this moment, and they were enveloped by a shapeless force and were gradually wriggling. The force was obscure and jet black in color, and strands of it creeped through every single inch of space in the surroundings, while emanating a strand of the aura of the terrifying energy of calamity. This is... Xianxia was horrified while terror that was impossible to restrain spread throughout his body. He seemed as if he was about to suffer a horrible calamity. The 9-heaven calamity Tao annihilation divine formation, one of the ancient divine formations of the sovereign sect that was passed down since the ancient times. It's capable of crushing gods and destroying the grand Tao, and it's said that death will be endless until the calamity ends. Dian Dian's voice sounded out by his ear, and her voice carried a heavy tone that was impossible to conceal. Xianxia came to a sudden understanding, yet a tempestuous wave arose in his heart. All of this really was done by the sovereign sect, and based on the current situation, they actually intend to make a clean sweep of us and annihilate us here. Why aren't we breaking through the formation? Xianxia couldn't help but ask when he saw the 3 immortal kings standing on the spot. Action taken by the sovereign sects won't be so simple. Let's wait and see first. Shiyu answered calmly. Rashly taking action at this moment will probably cause us to fall deeply into the grand formation. At the time, we'll be in danger. Xianxia frowned, and he didn't agree with their opinion that was akin to waiting for death to arrive. He raised his head while he deduced silently in his heart. In the end, he helplessly noticed that this ancient divine formation from the sovereign sect contained an obscure force, and it wasn't something he could deduce and see through at all. It wasn't that his cultivation in the Tao of Talismans was insufficient, and it was because his cultivation realm itself was too low. He was utterly unfamiliar with the force within the formation, so he wasn't able to deduce anything at all. Rumble. Right at this moment, a bright golden rainstorm actually poured down from the entire sky at this moment. The raindrops were bright golden, translucent, and crystalline. They contained a supreme and terrifying might, and every single raindrop contained a terrifyingly vast and powerful might. Now that it had transformed into a rainstorm that poured down, the scene before their eyes wasn't something that the words terrifying and extraordinary could describe. The rainstorm poured down like a waterfall throughout the heavens and the earth. After the bright golden rain poured onto the damaged corpses and bones, a shocking scene appeared. Numerous ancient blood god corpses were condensed into form once again. However, at this moment, they were different from before, and their entire bodies were covered in strands of a golden bloody glow and the gray aura of calamity. Their imposing aura were more than double than what they were before this. Moreover, the 4 ancient immortal king corpses that were originally destroyed into pieces actually started to condense into form and recover, and they were completely suffused with the golden rain and aura of calamity. At this moment, Xianxia felt suffocated as he was able to clearly sense that even if a single raindrop touched him, then it would be sufficient to take his life. The blood of immortal kings. As expected, the sovereign sect utilized cruel and merciless sacrificial techniques again. Looks like they've already killed the members of the prehistoric sects that were working together with them. At practically the exact same time, Shiryu and Xianglyu Li spoke while their expressions became even more heavier. We can't wait any longer. We must break through the formation. Dian Dian frowned and spoke resolutely. This was exactly what Shiryu and Xianglyu Li thought. Humph. Swearin Ting thinks he can wipe us all out with this little bit of ability? Isn't he too naive? Shiryu grunted coldly before he flipped his palm casually, and a gorgeous 5-colored rock actually appeared at the center of his palm. As soon as it appeared, it shot out strands of multicolored divine light that shot into the sky. 5-color rock. At the beginning of the prehistoric times, the 4 poles were crippled, the 9 continents were split apart, and the heavens and the earth were on the verge of collapse. Calamities of the heavens and the earth were occurring successively, and it was extremely difficult for the myriad of living beings and races in the world to survive. So, the master of Nuwas Dao Palace utilized the 5-color rock to mend the sky and utilized supreme and extraordinary might to hold down the karmic luck of all races. This was a legend, but it obviously showed how shocking the 5-color rock was. It was capable of mending the sky and perfection the heaven Dao laws, so how could it be ordinary? Yet now, when they saw Shiryu withdraw this divine treasure, Dian Dian couldn't help but exclaim with surprise. I never expected that you would prepare such a trump card this time. Shiryu smiled, and then he revealed a solemn expression as he said, Now, please follow closely behind me and allow me to take the lead. We must break through this grand formation in one go. As soon as he finished speaking, his figure flashed and suddenly soared into the sky. The 5-color rock in his hand transformed into divine radiance that covered the sky as it drifted and poured towards the surroundings. It actually dissolves the golden rain that covered the sky and emanated ear-piercing hissing sounds. At the same time, Dian Dian, Xianglyu Li, and Chun Shi followed closely behind him and charged over. Rumble. The battle erupted once more. Divine radiance covered the sky while terrifying and monstrous force drowned an area of 50,000 kilometers. On the other hand, Chun Shi once again had the misfortune of losing all his senses. He wasn't able to see anything, and he could only sense that this fierce battle was even more terrifying and intense than the last. If Dian Dian didn't separate a portion of her strength to protect him, he would probably instantly be evaporated in this vast battlefield. This sort of feeling was extremely uncomfortable. It was like his fate was shackled and at the will of others, and he was powerless to resist in the slightest. Chun Shi didn't like this sort of feeling, and he detested it from the bottom of his heart. However, he was similarly clearly aware that without these 3 immortal kings by his side, then he would truly be no different than a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. Strength. A voice resounded in Chun Shi's heart. Even though it was only a single word, it vividly described his desire because only strength could change everything, and it was able to allow him to stop experiencing this feeling of being powerless to resist. Shit! This is the might of the boundless world mirror. What? That bastard, Swearin Ting, actually utilized the boundless world mirror as the foundation of this formation. Watch out! Suddenly, Shiryu, Dian Dian, and Xianglyu Li's extremely shocked and furious voices sounded out by his ears, and it jolted Chun Shi back to his senses. Rumble. Before he could completely recover his senses, he felt his entire body shake fiercely while the bones in his entire body felt as if they'd been hammered into pieces and incinerated. Matchless aura of calamity and the blood of immortal kings surged into his entire body like wild horses, and they raged about while an indescribably intense feeling of pain rumbled and surged throughout his body. It tortured him to the point he couldn't restrain himself from shouting in pain. At this instant, Chun Shi felt as if his entire body was about to explode. At this critical moment, a wave of strange fluctuation suddenly stretched out from his sea of consciousness. It swiftly spread throughout his body like tidewater, and it was actually like a shark that had smelled blood as it swept away all the blood of the immortal kings that was raging about within his body. In this way, the intense pain in Chun Shi's entire body reduced slightly, yet the aura of calamity still remained, and it was even to the extent that it intended to corrode his Tao foundation and annihilate his soul. However, at practically the exact same instant that the river diagram fragments emanated the fluctuations, the Tao Calamity sword that had always laid silently without moving in the Buddha's pagoda within Xianxia's body had suddenly started droning as well. The glow of blood flowed on the body of the sword, and then overlapping layers of a dense lotus flower pattern bloomed from it. Bang! When the lotus flower pattern was completely condensed into form, a terrifying fluctuating aura didn't just completely swallow the aura of calamity within Xianxia's body. It even rumbled as it charged out of his body. Bang! 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 The screen of light formed from the five-color rock suffered attacks without end, and it trembled violently while rumbling. Yu's countenance was pale and covered in a serious expression. His entire body seemed as if it was blazing while he forcefully utilized the five-color rock in his hand, and it created a five-colored screen of light that forcefully resisted the attacks that came from all directions. At his side, Xianxia activated the 9-clarity jade crown and resisted the attacks with all her might. Her face was even paler than Yu and was on the verge of turning translucent while strands of golden blood seeped out from the corners of her mouth at this moment. Moreover, her entire body was trembling slightly. Obviously, an immortal king like her had suffered a certain amount of injuries while putting up such a resistance. All of this was because of the boundless world mirror. Earlier, they could be said to have been advancing without difficulty under the lead of Yu that utilized the five-color rock to open up a path, and they were about to kill their way out of the divine formation. Yet never had they imagined that an unexpected event would arise abruptly. The boundless world mirror actually flew out of the formation and caught them off guard, and it heavily injured them in one go. If Yu didn't react extremely swiftly and obstruct it with all his might via the five-color rock, they would have almost been obliterated by this strike. Now, even though they'd escaped that threat to their lives, they were merely able to rely on their own cultivations to resist the formation with all their might, and they were unable to charge out from it. It felt as if they were beasts in a cage that had fallen into a hopeless situation. If this sort of situation were to continue, then they would definitely be crushed on the spot from exhaustion. Rumble. Within the formation, the divine light of calamity poured down like a rainstorm, and it enveloped the heavens and the earth. These divine lights of calamity revealed an obscure and pitch-black color, and they were thick like buckets. It descended like ferocious divine lightning as it poured down and completely blocked off their paths of retreat. On the other hand, Yu and the others who stood beneath the screen of light emanated from the five-color rock seemed as if they were alone and helpless beneath a heavy rainstorm. Moreover, they suffered endless attacks at all times. Once the five-color rock screen of light was destroyed, then the consequences would be unimaginable. It wasn't just that. A dense mass of ancient blood god corpses was ceaselessly charging towards them from all directions, and there were even 4 ancient immortal king corpses present amongst them. These ancient corpses had originally been annihilated by them, yet they'd recovered after being repaired by the aura of calamity and blood of immortal kings. Moreover, their combat strength was more than 2 times stronger. All of this brought boundless pressure down upon Yu and the others. What should we do? At this moment, a wisp of anxiousness couldn't help but appear between Xianxia's brows. The boundless world mirror is a treasure that belongs to the master of the sovereign sect. It's capable of disturbing the workings of the heavens and concealing karma. With this mirror residing at the foundation of the formation, we're utterly unable to find a path to break through this formation. If this continues, then we can only wait helplessly for death to arrive. When looking for her point of view, there was a bronze ancient mirror floating in midair extremely far away. It was only around the size of a palm and was completely round in shape, and the surface of the mirror was suffused with surging strands of an obscure glow that illuminated the heavens and the earth while emanating strands of divine light of calamity. This was the boundless world mirror, a supreme divine treasure that possessed monstrous might and was extremely terrifying. It wasn't just capable of disturbing the workings of the heavens and concealing karma, it was also capable of creating layer upon layer of mirror planes that were like overlapping pockets of space that densely covered every inch of space. These mirror planes were able to convert the attacks of others into divine light of calamity, and the stronger the attacks were, the divine light of calamity would be even more terrifying and greater in number. Early on at the beginning of the prehistoric times, the sovereign sect had relied on this treasure to slaughter countless gods and trap innumerable extraordinary figures, creating an illustrious and ferocious reputation for itself. Presently, Ting hadn't just set up the nine-heaven calamity Tao annihilation divine formation. He'd made a blood sacrifice of 2 immortal kings and even utilized the boundless world mirror as the foundation of the formation. This string of events could be said to be filled with killing intent and perfect. Obviously, Ting intended to completely crush and annihilate them here. Under such circumstances, how could Xianxia Li not be anxious? If there really isn't any other way, then I'll send all of you out of this formation later, even if I have to risk my life. Yu went silent for a long time before a wisp of a resolute expression suddenly flashed on his cold and proud face. He was very clearly aware that even if they'd made sufficient preparations this time, they'd still underestimated the ruthless methods of the sovereign sect. No matter who it was, that person would probably have never expected that the sovereign sect would actually pay such a heavy price even before arriving at the god attainment altar and intended to annihilate all of them in one go. This had really exceeded their expectations indeed, and it had caught them by surprise because of this. Yet it was too late now, and the only choice they had now seemed to be risking their lives. Risking their lives means sacrifice. If they weren't forced into a hopeless situation, no immortal king would be willing to act in this way. When she heard use resolute words, Xianxia Li was stunned on the spot, while her heart sank to rock bottom. She was both sorrowful and furious, and the feelings in her heart were complicated to the extreme. Xianxia, quickly wake up, quickly wake up. At the side, Diane's voice resounded, and it carried anxiousness and a wisp of fear. At this moment, her countenance was ghastly pale while her clothes were dyed red with blood. The space between her brows was filled with concern and anxiousness as she looked at Xianxia who stood by her side, and she was actually slightly flustered. When she noticed this, Xianxia Li's heart was even greater chaos. Earlier, while they were charging forward, they'd been caught off guard by the boundless world mirror, and even Midnight Immortal King had suffered an injury, so it naturally affected Xianxia as well. Even though Midnight had helped him obstruct this lethal strike at the critical moment of life and death, because his cultivation was too weak, the energy of calamity and Immortal King blood had charged into his body. Presently, the vital energy within his entire body was in chaos while he shouted endlessly with pain, and he might perish at any moment. Could it be that we're bound to be doomed this time? The feelings in Xianxia Li's heart was complicated to the extreme while for no rhyme or reason. She recalled that this path that led to the god attainment altar was originally called Immortal King Burial. Since the ancient times until now, countless immortal kings had perished here. But Xianxia Li had never expected that she would actually suffer this bitter experience as well. Pooh! Right at this moment, a wave of a violent force surged over, and it shook the 5-colored screen of light to the point of wailing and shaking violently, causing Yu to be unable to help but spit out a mouthful of blood. In an instant, his face was ghastly pale and unsightly. We can't wait any longer. Junior Sister Li, I'll give it my all later and carve out a path of blood. Seize this opportunity to leave with Midnight and Xianxia. Yu turned around and stared at Xianxia Li with a firm gaze. Senior brother. Xianxia Li felt suffocated, and her heart hurt to the extreme. It's decided. Remember, you must enter the god attainment altar, and help me complete my wish to attain the Tao and become a god. A wisp of a smile curved up onto the corners of Yu's mouth, and he revealed 2 rows of snow-white teeth. After that, his expression suddenly turned solemn while the space between his brows was filled with a wisp of a resolute and firm expression. However, right when he was about to sacrifice himself to break through this predicament before them, an unexpected event occurred abruptly. Rumble! A shapeless and terrifying fluctuation suddenly stretched out. At that instant, Xianxia Li, and Diane's entire bodies couldn't help but stiffen while a trace of coldness spread throughout their bodies. Before they could recover from their shock, they heard a wave of strange droning resound through the heavens and the earth. In an instant, numerous clear, colored lotus flowers suddenly bloomed in the heavens and the earth. Every single lotus flower was translucent, crystalline, and had 36 petals, and they overlapped perfectly with each other. Moreover, the lotus petals were clear, misty, and seemed to be shaped like swords. When combined together, they were like numerous clear lotus swords that emanated an extraordinary and supreme might. This scene was too shocking. Countless clear, colored sword lotuses had descended from the sky and suffused every single inch of space in the heavens and the earth, and they dyed this expanse of the heavens and the earth to the point it seemed sacred and grand. What's this? Shiryu, Xianxia, and Dian were stunned in unison, and their eyes erupted with strands of divine radiance. Swish, swish, in their fields of vision, the clear-colored sword lotuses bloomed in the heavens and the earth and emanated strands of terrifying radiances of divinity, and they actually completely devoured the divine light of calamity that filled the sky. When looked at from afar, it was like the divine lights of calamity were rivers that surged into numerous deep black holes made of lotus flowers, and it was so natural and easy. From the beginning until the end, the divine light of calamity wasn't just unable to damage the clear sword lotus at all. It was even like a myriad of streams returning to its source and surged into the embrace of the latter. And the source. Swoosh! The gazes of Shiryu and the others shot towards the side in unison and descended onto Xianxia, and then a wisp of shock couldn't help but suffuse their faces. Because to their surprise, they actually saw a sword. The sword was over a meter long, a crimson-red sword of blood. Numerous ancient and exuberant lotus flowers were branded within the body of the sword. Every single lotus flower carried strands of chaotic qi drifting about within them, and these strands of chaotic qi sometimes transformed into old men in ancient clothes and high crowns who were reading scriptures and sometimes transformed into beautiful young women that were dancing about with thousands of postures. It was miraculous and otherworldly. However, in the eyes of Shiryu and the others, they saw an expanse of a vast bloody battlefield. The gods were roaring furiously and howling sorrowfully while a rain of blood poured down from the sky, and the ground was covered in poles of corpses and bones. At this moment, this sword was emanating its aura from within Xianxia's body. A bloody glow rose while strands of terrifying and shapeless force surged out from within it, and it spread throughout the heavens and the earth before transforming into clear sword lotuses that covered the sky. The Tao Calamity Sword. In an instant, Shiryu and the others recognized the sword, and their expressions were filled with realization. After that, a wisp of shock surged onto their faces, as they seemed to have never expected that this sword would actually be in Xianxia's possession. Ha ha ha! The heavens haven't given up on us. Shiryu couldn't help but roar with laughter that shook the surroundings. He'd already decided earlier to give up his life in exchange for the lives of the others, yet never had he expected that a trace of an opportunity to live would actually appear at this critical moment. Xianxia smiled lightly as well, and her face was filled with happiness. The Tao Calamity Sword. This divine weapon is the greatest headache for the sovereign sect. When she spoke up to hear, she looked at Dian while seeming as if she'd thought of something, and she said with a smile, "No wonder you insisted on bringing little brother Xianxia along with us. Could it be that you expected all of this since the beginning?" At this moment, Dian was extremely happy, and her face was covered in smiles because she noticed that the injuries within Xianxia's body had already completely recovered and calmed down at this moment. It wasn't violent and chaotic as it was before, and he wasn't on the verge of death any longer. However, when she heard Xianxia, Dian was slightly stunned, and then she puckered her lips and said with a smile, "I'm unable to deduce all of this. However, I'm clearly aware that this fellow isn't ordinary. He really isn't ordinary. Which golden immortal in this world is actually capable of saving the lives of 3 immortal kings?" Shiryu roared with laughter, and he didn't conceal his admiration of Xianxia at all. The clear sword lotuses covered the sky as they bloomed, and they drifted through every single inch of space while devouring strand after strand of calamity divine light that poured down. After that, it transformed into strand after strand of shapeless force that converged together before surging into the Tao Calamity Sword within Xianxia's body. As more and more calamity divine light was devoured, the entire blood-red Dao Calamity sword started emanated waves of sword howls that grew in loudness until becoming like dragon roars that resounded through the heavens and the earth. The sword howls were like a tide and were filled with supreme energy of divinity. At this instant, the nine-heaven calamity Dao annihilation divine formation was actually obstructed and fell into a stagnate state. Pooh! 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 On the other hand, the dense mass of ancient blood god corpses that covered the heavens and the earth suffered endless attacks at this moment. Their entire bodies were suffused with the aura of calamity, and they were similarly the targets of the clear sword lotus's attacks. Every single clear sword lotus emanated strands of terrifying and murderous sword chi that smashed down. In an instant, it slaughtered countless ancient blood god corpses, and it was an extremely astonishing scene. Even if it was immortal kings like Shiryu, Xianxia Li, and Dian Dian, they couldn't help but exclaim with shock upon witnessing this scene. This is the might of the Dao Calamity Sword, a sword that innately counters the energy of calamity. With their knowledge, they were naturally clearly aware of that shocking scheme that occurred during the primeval times. All those years ago, the enmity between the sovereign sect and the chaotic divine lotus had come from the Dao Calamity Sword. Because of this, the sovereign sect had exerted a great deal of effort in order to scheme against the chaotic divine lotus at the moment when it was attaining the grand Dao. Unfortunately, the sovereign sect was still unable to obtain the Dao Calamity Sword in the end, and this matter had become a sore point in the sovereign sect. No one had expected that this legendary primeval divine weapon would have actually fallen into Xianxia's hands. Let's make a move as well. It couldn't be any better if we're able to seize the boundless world mirror. Shiryu took a deep breath, and then his gaze swiftly locked onto the bronze ancient mirror that floated in midair in the distant while his expression revealed cold killing intent. Earlier, he was pressured to the extent of almost fighting with his life on the line, and he'd accumulated a bellyful of rage since long ago. At this moment, the situation had turned around, so how could he possibly restrain himself? Rumble! He held the five-color rock as he strode through space and charged forward. Let's go as well. Let's seize this opportunity to leave this place as soon as possible. I really can't wait to get even for this with those bastards from the sovereign sect. Xianxia Li turned around to glance at Dian Dian before she spoke in a light voice while her face had recovered its usually proud expression. When exalted immortal kings like them were pressured to such an extent, how could they possibly swallow this resentment? All right, but I still have to take care of this fellow first. Dian Dian smiled as she glanced at Xianxia, who stood by her side. At this moment, Xianxia's mind had recovered its clarity, and he heard their conversation, but he was unable to move in a short period of time, because the Dao Calamity Sword was droning within his body while devouring the Calamity Divine Light, and it caused him to lose control of his body. It was even to the extent that he was unable to open his mouth and speak. This was the first time that Xianxia had encountered such a situation. However, the Dao Calamity Sword was given to him by Dao Lotus, so it would absolutely not harm him. Thus, he wasn't worried that any mishaps would occur. He was just slightly curious. Why would the Dao Calamity Sword suddenly awaken at this moment? Xianxia intended to ask Dian Dian about this once he was able to move, because Dian Dian had clearly recognized this sword long ago. At the same time, in the space 50,000 kilometers away from them, Xueran Ting's expression suddenly turned grim. Shit! What is it? Zhang Lingxiao was stunned. Damn it! It's actually the aura of the Dao Calamity Sword. Xueran Ting sensed it carefully for a moment before his face instantly sank. This sword was left behind by the chaotic divine lotus all those years ago, and it innately counters the energy of calamity possessed by my sovereign sect. What? Hasn't that sword become lost a long time ago? We weren't even able to find it after we annihilated the 9 Radiant Sword sect. How could it possibly appear in the hands of Nuwas Dao Palace? When she heard the words Dao Calamity Sword, Zhang Lingxiao's expression turned slightly grim. Never had she imagined that after the matter had developed to such an extent, such an unexpected event would actually occur. The Dao Calamity Sword, that was a thorn in the heart of the sovereign sect, and the sovereign sect couldn't eat and sleep in peace if this thorn wasn't removed. Shiryu, Xianxia Li, Midnight Immortal King, they shouldn't possess that sword, otherwise, How could it possibly deceive the senses of our sect master? Swearin Ting took a deep breath and forcefully restrained the restlessness in his heart as he muttered while frowning. Wait, we forgot one. After a short moment, Swearin Ting's eyes suddenly erupted with boundless flames that seemed to desire to incinerate the sky, and it was extremely shocking. Damn it! His fate is actually concealed by the workings of the heavens. No wonder even the boundless world mirror was unable to notice his existence. His fate is concealed by the workings of the heavens? So, in this way, the aura of the Tao Calamity Sword was concealed as well? So that's how it is. Zhang Lingxiao instantly understood everything. Right at this moment, Swearin Ting suddenly let out a muffled groan while his pupils constricted abruptly, and his expression instantly became unsightly. That damnable Shiryu is actually trying to seize the boundless world mirror. This string of unexpected events took Zhang Lingxiao by surprise. But she was very clearly aware that their meticulous plans this time had probably been carried out in vain. Damn it! An unknown fate actually affected our entire plans. If I find out who this kid is, then I'll definitely kill his entire family. Since he'd cultivated to such a cultivation realm, Swearin Ting understood that the unknown meant that there were variables. Once there were variables, then no matter how tiny it was, if it was grabbed a hold of by an immortal king, it would be sufficient to turn the situation around. Swearin Ting didn't dare hesitate any longer. His crimson-red hair fluttered while an enormous flaming glow suddenly surged out from his entire body. He was like an emperor of flames, and he suddenly stretched out his hand and grabbed towards the space in the distance. Rumble! 50,000 kilometers away, a bronze ancient mirror suddenly tore through space and revolved before it flashed. In an instant, it had already traversed boundless space and fell into Swearin Ting's palm. Let's go. Our plans have failed this time, so we can't stay here any longer. We can only look for another opportunity to make a move. Swearin Ting's expression was gloomy as he flicked his sleeve, and a path of flames unfolded beneath his feet. It led directly into the depths of space, and then he instantly vanished without a trace. Next time? There probably won't be such a superb opportunity next time. Zhang Lingxiao sighed in her heart and was rather disgruntled. However, her figure still flashed in the end, and she transformed into a ray of watery blue light that tore through the sky as she left. Rumble! Divine radiance erupted as the 4 towering divine mountains were shattered into pieces, and they transformed into surging chaotic torrents that swept towards the surrounding space. Everywhere they passed, stars were shattered into pieces while the masses of land that floated in space rumbled and were obliterated, and it was an extremely shocking scene. At this point, the 9 heaven calamity Tao annihilation divine formation had been completely destroyed. Humph! They really fled quickly. Amidst the dust and dirt that suffused the air, Shiryu's lone and mighty figure charged out, and it was dazzling and resplendent while it emanated the supreme and arrogant aura of an immortal king. His gaze looked towards the distance, and he didn't pursue them in the end. In this battle, he wasn't the only one that had exhausted a great deal of his strength. Even Xiangliu Li and Dian Dian had suffered some injuries. They needed to rest and reorganize for some time, and if it wasn't for that, he would have pursued Swearin Ting and Zhang Lingxiao. Senior brother Shiryu, there's no need to be impatient. We'll definitely have a chance to meet them in the God Attainment region. Xiangliu Li walked over as well and spoke in a light voice. Shiryu nodded, and then he said, Right, how's brother Chunxi? Xiangliu Li couldn't help but smile when Chunxi was mentioned. He's fine, and he just can't move for now. I'll go have a look at him. Shiryu turned around and left. Earlier, he'd looked after Chunxi only out of consideration for Oracle Mountain, and their relationship couldn't be considered to be deep. After all, Chunxi was only a golden immortal, and the gap between them was too far. But after they'd experienced this unexpected event and Chunxi had saved his life, Shiryu would naturally not treat Chunxi as he did before this. Xiangliu Li smiled lightly when she saw this, and she immediately followed after him. Her thoughts were roughly similar to Shiryu. However, she wasn't aware of Chunxi's origins, and her understanding of Chunxi merely came from Midnight Immortal King. Even though she was rather considerate to Chunxi all along the way, It was only because it was the proper attitude a senior should have towards a junior. Yet now, she didn't dare think like that any longer. Merely the matter that Xianxia possessed the Tao Calamity Sword caused her to not dare take Xianxia as an ordinary golden immortal. Meanwhile, the Tao Calamity Sword had returned to calm once more. However, Xianxia acutely noticed that after it absorbed a large amount of Calamity Divine Light, the Tao Calamity Sword seemed to have faintly undergone slight changes, yet he was unable to figure it out when he investigated this change. After that, Xianxia finally noticed that not only was he able to move again, his cultivation had actually improved by a shred. The vital energy in his entire body felt complete and bulging as if he was on the verge of breaking through. This caused him to be delighted in his heart. He was very clearly aware that if nothing unexpected happened, then when he returned to the immortal dimension from the God Attainment region this time, he would probably be able to step into the path of gods and saint and advance into the saint immortal realm. I never expected that in this great tribulation. Not only had the river diagram fragments awakened and helped me deal with the assault of the immortal king's blood, even the Tao Calamity Sword droned and awakened to resolve the calamity I faced. Everything he experienced earlier felt like a dream, and Xianxia couldn't help but be extremely dazed when he thought about it at this moment. Presently, he was able to roughly determine that the unexpected changes in the river diagram fragments was probably related to the God Attainment region, whereas the unexpected change in the Tao Calamity Sword was related to the Sovereign Sect's energy of calamity instead. No matter what, the danger this time was averted in the end. Xianxia took a deep breath and opened his eyes. After that, he saw that Dian Dian, Shiyu, and Xiangliu Li were all by his side, and they were all looking at him with smiles on their faces. Moreover, they had warm expressions that carried a wisp of sincere concern. This caused Xianxia to be unable to help but be overwhelmed by the sudden favor. There were countless golden immortals in the world, yet could any one of these golden immortals receive the uniform concern of 3 immortal kings? Such good fortune was something others couldn't obtain even if they fought to death for it. Brother Xianxia, you saved all of our lives this time. Shiyu roared with laughter when he saw Xianxia awaken, and he didn't conceal his admiration at all. Exactly. We'd probably have perished if it wasn't for you. Xiangliu Li smiled lightly from the side. I told you he isn't ordinary. Dian Dian blinked, and she was grinning as well. Even with Xianxia's composure, being praised by 3 immortal kings caused him to be unable to help but feel embarrassed at this moment. Even though he was embarrassed, Xianxia was still extremely happy in his heart because of the favor and appreciation of these 3 immortal kings. He was able to clearly sense that after they experienced that shocking unexpected event, the relationship between them had grown a step closer. There was a little bit less courtesy from before and a little bit more of a true friendly relationship. This was the thing that made Xianxia the happiest. A great disturbance just occurred here. Thus, in order to avoid any mishaps from occurring, we should first find a secluded place to rest and reorganize, and it wouldn't be too late for us to set out after that. After they asked about Xianxia briefly and found out that he was fine, Shiyu immediately decided. Obviously, after they experienced the unexpected event from before, it caused Shiyu to realize that ensuring their safety was the first priority in this God Attainment region that was filled with danger. As for the fortune that lay within the God Attainment altar, it was sufficient if they tried their best to obtain it, and they absolutely couldn't lose their lives just for the sake of a fortuitous encounter because it wouldn't be worth it. Everyone immediately flashed and left under Shiyu's lead. After the time for an incense stick to burn, they arrived on a mass of land that floated in the boundless space, and they descended into a quiet and secluded gorge. Shiyu flicked his sleeve, causing the 5-color rock to transform into a screen of light that completely enveloped the gorge, and then its glow was restrained before it fell into silence. When looked at from outside, the gorge was still that same gorge, yet the auras of Shiyu and the others had been completely concealed. Moreover, if any unexpected event occurred, then the 5-color rock would form a restriction that protected them, so it couldn't be any safer. After he finished doing all of this, Shiyu heaved a sigh of relief. In the battle just now, he'd more or less suffered some injuries, and he needed a period of time to recover. At this moment, their safety was naturally the most important. After all, this was a region called the Immortal King Burial, and it was filled with all sorts of dangers. so no one dared to let down their guards while they recovered their injuries here. However, before recovering, Shiryu flicked his sleeve and withdrew a pile of Tao Spirit pearls. He divided them into 4 portions of over 1,000 each before he distributed them to himself, Xianxia Li, Dian, and Chen Shi. These were from the ancient blood god corpses that they'd killed earlier. Besides these, there were another 4 more pearls that were shaped like hearts, and they were completely suffused with an obscure aura. They were called Immortal King Saint Hearts. They contained the essence of an ancient Immortal King corpse's cultivation, and he distributed them as well to existences at the Immortal King realm like Shiryu and the others. Over 1,000 Tao Spirit pearls and a Immortal King Saint Heart couldn't be considered to be a great deal of wealth. However, it was simply an extraordinary fortune to Chen Shi. No matter if it was the Tao Spirit pearls or the Immortal King Saint Heart, it was an irresistible temptation to existences at the half-step Immortal King realm. If Chen Shi said that he intended to sell these treasures, then it would absolutely draw over a huge crowd of half-step Immortal Kings that would bid to obtain it. The reason was that this treasure was required for one's cultivation in the Immortal King realm, and because it was too supreme, it was priceless and could only be chanced upon by luck. However, Chen Shi was speechless because these treasures hadn't even gotten warm in his hands before they were once more taken away by the river diagram fragments. And it didn't even leave one behind for him. That was over 1,000 Tao Spirit pearls and an Immortal King Saint Heart. At this moment, the corners of Chen Shi's mouth couldn't help but twitch without end, and he felt a trace of pain from this loss. He originally thought that even if he had no use of these treasures, he could take it back to the academy and utilize it as gifts to further improve the friendship between him and those seniors at the half-step Immortal King realm in the academy. Yet never had he expected that it would vanish in the blink of an eye. This naturally caused Chen Shi to be rather depressed. Fortunately, Dian gave Chen Shi a pleasant surprise. When Shiryu and Xianxia Li had successively started to meditate and recover, Dian called Chen Shi over to the side before she pushed a jade box into his hands. The river diagram fragment is inside here. In any case, it's useless in my possession, so it's better to give it to you beforehand. Dian smiled as she spoke via voice transmission, and her clear eyes shone as she smiled sweetly. Chen Shi was stunned and said, "I don't seem to have done much in this trip." Dian interrupted him and said, "You've already saved us once. Not to mention that it'll be yours sooner or later." Chen Shi frowned and pondered deeply, and he was silent for a long time before asked, "Then, can I know why you brought a golden immortal like me along this time?" Dian combed the strand of hair at the side of her fair ear, and her clear eyes flowed with light as she chuckled. "I knew you wouldn't be able to resist." When she spoke up to hear, she tilted her head and thought for a moment before she said, "Actually, I didn't know you well before this. At the very most, I'd only heard that there was a #1 expert amongst the new students in Tao Emperor Academy called Chen Shi. But later on, someone came to Midnight Continent to look for me and asked me to hand over the river diagram fragment in my possession. And the price was..." She promised that I would definitely be able to find the technique to attain the Tao and become a god. "You agreed just like that?" Chen Shi couldn't refrain himself from asking this question, and he'd faintly guessed who the person Dian mentioned was. That's the secret to becoming a god. Can any immortal king in the 3 dimensions refuse it? Dian hugged her knees as she sat on the grass at the side, and she stared extremely far into space while she smiled lightly. Not to mention that exchanging a river diagram fragment for the secret to becoming a god was definitely worth it. "Weren't you worried that you were deceived?" Chen Shi couldn't refrain himself once more, and he was slightly unable to understand her thoughts. "Do you think she would deceive me?" asked Dian with a smile. Chen Shi didn't answer her directly, and he just sighed. "After that, you came looking for me? And you took me to be the critical factor for you to find the method to become a god." Dian nodded as a matter of course. "Of course. She's your little senior sister, so she naturally wouldn't deceive me." Chen Shi laughed bitterly and rubbed his nose. He finally understood the reason for all of this. All of this was naturally done by his senior sister Li Yang. Because of the river diagram fragments, she'd first gone to see Dian, and then utilized the secret of attaining the Tao and becoming a god to make a trace with Dian Dian, whereas the key to the whole trade was him. Once the trade was completed, Dian Dian would be able to obtain the secret to becoming a god, and he would be able to obtain the river diagram fragment, so it could be considered as a win-win. But the main point is, on what basis would senior sister Liang be so sure that I would definitely be able to help Dian Dian find the technique to attain the Tao and become a god? After all, I haven't even heard of the god attainment region before this. Yet it just so happened that Dian Dian believed her and came looking for me, and she brought me along to the god attainment region. In Xianxia's opinion, all of this was filled with uncertainty, especially when he saw that an immortal king like Dian Dian seemed to be completely confident in him, and it caused Xianxia to feel a mountain of pressure pressing down upon him. Xianxia pondered for a long time and couldn't refrain himself. What if? There are no what-ifs. Do your best and leave it up to fate. Dian Dian directly smiled and interrupted him. Not to mention that if it's in terms of understanding towards the secrets of the heavens, then your Oracle Mountain is number 1 in the 3 dimensions. This time, she didn't conceal the words Oracle Mountain. Xianxia laughed bitterly, and he didn't know if he should feel fortunate or helpless that an immortal king trusted him to such an extent. I wonder senior sister was thinking. She didn't even notify me beforehand. Xianxia sighed in his heart, and then he immediately stopped thinking about it. Since he'd started cultivating until now, his senior sister Liang had helped him on more than one occasion. Moreover, every single time she acted, it carried deep meaning, and it caused Xianxia to firmly believe that his senior sister was definitely acting for his own good and wouldn't make him fall into danger. Meditate at ease, youngest junior brother of Oracle Mountain. Even I don't feel really pressured, so you don't have to bear any burdens. Dian Dian stood up and grinned as she teased Xianxia, and then she returned to the side and started to meditate and recover. She'd helped Xianxia ward off a lethal attack in the 9-heaven calamity Tao annihilation divine formation earlier, and the injuries she suffered were even more severe than Shiyu and Shangliuli. At this moment, she had to make the best use of her time and recover. Never mind, I'll take it step by step. Xianxia took a deep breath and discarded all the distracting thoughts in his mind, and then he immediately found a secluded place to sit down cross-legged on. He opened up the jade box carefully to reveal an irregular-shaped river diagram fragment laying silently in the box, and it emanated an ancient and primitive aura. This is the 6th river diagram fragment I've seen. What sort of pleasant surprise will it bring me this time? At this moment, Xianxia's eyes gradually started burning with anticipation. When his hand had just touched the river diagram fragment in the jade box, a strange droning fluctuation arose in his sea of consciousness, and then it had already taken the river diagram fragment in the jade box. Bang! In an instant, the river diagram fragments in his sea of consciousness fused together, and they suddenly emanated a powerful and ancient aura that covered Xianxia's sea of consciousness before erupting within his mind. Various obscure and mysterious diagrams and markings flashed within his mind with shocking speed. In an instant, it was as if he'd experienced the passage of a myriad of years. The world grew and fell. Everything in the world withered and flourished. Time passed. Generations rose and fell. The scenes of the worlds within the chaotic universe were revealed and produced in an unbelievable manner within his mind. It felt as if he'd experienced a myriad of different types of lives in an instant. The vast and powerful experiences he'd obtained even caused Xianxia to feel as if he was on the verge of exploding. Bang! Xianxia's mind went blank, and he completely lost his senses. All of this occurred within his sea of consciousness. From the outside, he was sitting cross-legged with a tranquil expression, and his breathing was long and continuous. He was like a clay statue, and there wasn't anything strange about him. In this way, he didn't draw the attention of the 3 immortal kings in the vicinity. Thump! 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 After an unknown period of time that felt as if he'd been slumbering for countless years, yet felt like he'd just dozed off at the same time, a powerful rumbling sound resounded within Xianxia's sea of consciousness. The sound was extremely rhythmic, wonderful, and indescribable. It seemed as if a life was being born. A life? Right at this moment that Xianxia was stunned, he felt rumbling echo within him. Within his Tao heart, It seemed like the scene of the formation of the world when the chaos was split apart, and the rumble of spring thunder resounded while his heart energy surged out like an erupting volcano. It was surging. It was so exuberant. It was seething. It dyed his entire Tao heart in a bright golden and translucent color. After that, she noticed a scene that caused his mouth to open wide with shock. Strands of golden light drifted and transformed into strands of mysterious Tao markings that enshrouded the surroundings. A tiny person with clear features and seemed like an infant sat cross-legged within his Tao heart while meditating. It glowed lustrously and was completely suffused with a pure and flawless aura. Along with the breathing of this tiny person, strands of pure, thick, and seemingly material heart energy circulated without end, and they transformed into strands of golden light that drifted about and seethed, causing the tiny person to seem like a god. The heart-infant realm. In an instant, Xianxia determined that his cultivation in the Tao heart had actually transformed from the heart-soul realm into the heart-infant realm at this moment. This was precisely the reason why Xianxia was dumbstruck. The realms of heart energy were divided into heart-chi, heart-core, heart-soul, and heart-infant. Because this energy was too unreal and incorporeal, there were very few techniques in the world to cultivate heart energy. For example, in the mortal dimension, the myriad of living beings there mostly didn't know what heart energy was. Even if they knew about heart energy, most of them only had a simple understanding that one could only condense heart energy by killing great villains, and it was impossible to cultivate it with any other way. If Xianxia hadn't obtained the immeasurable virtue technique in the Grand Deduction Tower of the Talisman Dimension, then he would be utterly unable to attain the heart-soul realm in his heart energy. Unfortunately, even if he possessed a technique to cultivate heart energy, Xianxia was still at the heart-soul realm until moments ago, and this obviously showed how difficult it was to cultivate heart energy. Yet now, his cultivation in heart energy had actually broken through to the next realm, the heart-infant realm. Moreover, he didn't have a clue that it was advancing during this entire process. So how could Xianxia not be shocked? It was the heart-infant realm. According to Xianxia's understanding from before, if he wanted to advance into the Immortal King realm and grasp the grand Tao of Immortal Kings, then the precondition was that he possessed a cultivation in heart energy at the heart-infant realm, while seizing the karmic luck of the heaven Tao and condensing the body of an Immortal King was only the secondary condition. It could be said that merely this threshold had obstructed the footsteps of countless half-step Immortal Kings, let alone seizing the karmic luck of the heavens and condensing the body of an Immortal King. Yet now, Xianxia had already grasped the heart-infant realm while only at the advanced stage of the golden Immortal realm, so even he was surprised and shocked. If news of this matter were to be spread, then it would probably even shock the jaws off of seniors at the half-step Immortal King realm because it was simply world-shocking. All of this is definitely the contribution of the river diagram fragments. In next to no time, Xianxia calmed down, and he roughly understood that it was the benefit he received after fusing with the sixth river diagram fragment. At this moment, the state he was in was extremely strange. His consciousness had clearly recovered, yet he was unable to open his eyes. The vital energy within his entire body was actually in a strange circulating state, and he seemed like he was meditating yet also seemed like he was comprehending the Tao. Most importantly, Xianxia was actually unable to stop all of this. It seemed like there was a shapeless force that was leading the essence, spirit, and energy within his body to circulate in a natural manner, and it didn't cause him to feel uncomfortable at all. Moreover, he felt as if he was bathing under a spring breeze and had returned to the embrace of nature instead. Amidst this strange and indescribable state, Xianxia was able to clearly sense that his cultivation was actually quickly rising steadily like a ship rising with the tide. The immortal force in his body surged, cheered, and rose explosively. The vital energy in his entire body seethed, rumbled, and transformed at a shocking speed. Yet it just so happened that it didn't feel uncomfortable to Xianxia at all. His foundation was still thick and solid as before while his aura didn't become chaotic from the explosive rise in his strength. All of this seemed to be occurring without any extra effort because the conditions were ripe. It was unbelievable. After all, it had only been less than half a year since Xianxia advanced into the advanced stage of the Golden Immortal Realm. Yet right at this moment, his cultivation was rising successively like a bamboo shoot rising up after the rain, and in merely the time for a few breaths, his cultivation had actually started moving towards a solid, flawless, and perfect state. Moreover, it faintly showed a slight sign of being on the verge of breaking through. Could this be the benefits given by the river diagram fragments? At this moment, Xianxia was dazed. Just moments ago, his cultivation in heart energy had broken through to the heart infant realm. Now, his own cultivation had attained a state of perfection and faintly showed signs of advancing into the saint immortal realm. All of this was too surprising. He couldn't help but move his attention away and stare at the river diagram fragments in his sea of consciousness. Sure enough, he noticed that the sixth river diagram fragment had fused with the rest. At this moment, its ancient and dark surface was actually faintly suffused with a light translucent glow, and it floated there silently and circulated while emanating an incorporeal glow. Since he'd entered the God attainment region, the river diagram fragments had been undergoing unexpected changes. First, it silently took away his Tao spirit pearls. Then it assisted Xianxia to deal with the assault of immortal king blood in his body, while he was within the nine-heaven calamity Tao annihilation divine formation, and later on, the river diagram fragments took away the immortal king saint heart. In the end, after he fused with the sixth river diagram fragment, everything seemed to have undergone a transformation, and it surprised Xianxia with all sorts of pleasant surprises. Heart energy at the heart infant realm. His cultivation rose repeatedly. Everything was so sudden, yet it happened so easily without any extra effort. Moreover, all of this allowed Xianxia to realize that the changes in the river diagram fragments this time was definitely not so simple. Perhaps, I'll be able to break through into the saint immortal realm under the assistance of the river diagram fragments? Rumble. Right when this thought arose in Xianxia's heart, his sea of consciousness felt as if it was struck by lightning while his entire body trembled. In the next moment, a grand, ancient, and extremely mysterious picture surged into appearance within his mind. It was an altar. It stood within the chaotic space and towered into the sky. It was completely pitch black, and it was like a path that led to the world outside the three dimensions. As he stood before it, he felt tiny like an ant, and as he looked up to it, he was actually unable to see the end of it. The altar was too ancient and seemed to have stood in the chaotic space for innumerable years. It was solemn and silent, and it seemed to have watched the changes of the worlds in the three dimensions, causing others to involuntarily arouse devoted and reverent feelings while wishing for nothing more than to kneel down in worship. This wouldn't be that altar, right? A flash of inspiration appeared in Xianxia's mind. In the next moment, his field of vision appeared atop the altar. It was completely in chaos, gray and blurry, and it seemed like the beginning of the universe when the entire world was still in a chaotic state. After that, Xianxia saw a bright golden chart. It was like a picture scroll that lay across the chaos, and it just happened to lay across the two ends of the heavens. However, because it was covered by the chaos, even if Xianxia tried with all his might, he was actually unable to view the true appearance of the chart, let alone see exactly what was recorded on it. What is this? The God attainment chart? Xianxia was stunned. Rumble. After that, an eye suddenly opened up in the chaos. At the instant when he met the gaze of this eye, Xianxia's entire body felt as if it had fallen into an icy pit as his body was completely icy cold, and he couldn't help but shudder. What sort of eye was that? It was pitch black, deep, icy cold, and indifferent. It seemed as if countless talisman markings were flickering within it, and it seemed like the rise and fall of the heavens and the earth, the movements of the stars, the passage of time, the changes in the universe, everything was revealed within it. When he looked at it from afar, Xianxia had the terrifying feeling that his heart, past, and present had been seen through. What is that? The eye of the heaven Tao? Or is it the eye of a terrifying existence? This caused Xianxia to feel horrified and even arouse a feeling of extreme detest, rage, and ruthlessness. He wished for nothing more than to smash that eye into pieces with his fist. Right when Xianxia was furious to the extreme, had bloodshot eyes, and had clenched his fists tightly with the intention of attacking, a droning sound arose in his mind. After that, All the scenes before his eyes transformed into shattered torrents that vanished into nothingness. Chun, she suddenly shouted reflexively. In the next moment, he opened his eyes and awakened completely. What is it? Little brother Xianxia, you wouldn't have encounter inner demons in your cultivation, right? A wave of concerned voices resounded. Xianxia raised his eyes and saw that Dian, Shiyu, and Li were all by his side at this moment, and their expressions more or less carried a trace of worry. However, all of them instantly heaved sighs of relief when they saw Xianxia had returned completely to his senses. Earlier, Xianxia's state was too strange. He was clearly sitting cross-legged and cultivating in meditation, yet his expression was sometimes surprised and sometimes revealed a frown. In the end, it instantly became savage, and even his aura became heavy and seemed as if he was suffering from qi deviation. This naturally drew the attention of Shiyu and the others. I'm fine. Xianxia let out a long sigh, and then he spoke with a smile. However, a wisp of rage still remained in his heart, but it was quickly suppressed by him. The path of cultivation is unfathomably dangerous, so you must not be impatient. A single unsteady step will cause inner demons to be easily planted in your heart, and it will cause all sorts of disturbances while you cultivate. It's very harmful to you. Sure, you noticed with a single glance that Xianxia's cultivation had actually improved greatly in this short period of time, and he couldn't help but frown as he thought the strange state Xianxia experienced earlier was caused by Xianxia being too impatient in his cultivation. Thank you for your guidance, brother Shiyu. Xianxia nodded. At this moment, his mind was in chaos, and his expression couldn't help but be slightly dazed. When she noticed this scene, Dian immediately instructed and said, "It's all right so long as you're fine. Calm your heart and regulate your breathing for some time. We won't disturb you for now, and we'll set out to the God Attainment altar once you're recovered completely." As she spoke, she shot a glance at Shiyu and Li, and then they turned around and left. She couldn't help but take a few more deep breaths, and only now did his mind completely recover its calm. The scenes I saw earlier were simply mysterious, unfathomable, and bizarre. Why did my heart actually become so furious and ruthless when I saw that Besides that, is that towering altar the God Attainment altar? Then what's the chart that is concealed in the chaotic space above the altar and lays across it? Strange, all of this was definitely a reaction caused by the river diagram fragments. But why would it reveal such a scene to me? Numerous questions surged into Xianxia's heart, and it caused his pitch-black and slanted brows to be unable to help but slowly knit together. In the next, he wasn't able to figure anything out. This was something that couldn't be helped. Perhaps he would be able to obtain an answer after they really arrived at the God Attainment altar. Fortunately, all of this wasn't a hallucination. She sensed that his cultivation in heart energy that was in the heart infant realm and cultivation that had attained perfection in the golden immortal realm, and he instantly felt really at ease. The only regret he had was perhaps he didn't seize this chance to advance and break through into the saint immortal realm in one go. However, she was already very satisfied. One day later, Shiyu and the others' injuries had completely recovered. They immediately stopped wasting time here and left this floating mass of land. Swoosh! In the boundless chaotic space, Shiyu took the lead and led all of them forward at full speed. They flashed past numerous floating masses of land and passed over countless stars, and they flew without stopping or resting for over a month. All along the way, they'd encountered all sorts of dangers at practically every single moment. There were assaults from ancient blood god corpses, there were spatial turbulence that swept over, and there were even many occasions where they mistakenly entered the restrictions of the gods that had existed for countless years, and they utilized all their ability in order to escape the restriction. During this entire process, she wasn't affected by any danger because all the danger and killing intent had been dealt with by the three immortal kings. But even then, as a bystander, she still sensed that as the deeper they headed into the boundless space, the more terrifying the dangers they encountered became, and it was even to the extent that the three Immortal King Realm experts had no choice but to be on high alert and treat it with caution. As for the gains, it wasn't much. After all, Shiryu and the others didn't place their attention on gathering treasures, and they wholeheartedly desired to arrive at the God Attainment altar as soon as possible. On this day, they were slowly flying above an ocean of stars. This ocean of stars was rather dense. Meteorites flowed within it while the stars circulated, and a multicolored divine light rose from it. It was like a boundless multicolored ocean, and it was an extremely magnificent scene. Shiryu and Xianxia stood side by side at the front, and they were on high alert towards the surroundings while they whispered in discussion. They were discussing their following course of action, because according to their inference, they'd arrive before the God Attainment altar in less than 3 days. At that time, they had to consider how they should compete with their other opponents in order to locate the technique to attain the Tao and become a god. It definitely wouldn't just be the sovereign sect that would participate in this, because the various sects of the prehistoric ruins would certainly send their members over. This was something that was extremely obvious. On the other side, she was modestly asking Dian for guidance on the profundities of the Saint Immortal realm. Dian was in existence at the Immortal King realm, and her knowledge was something that stood proudly at the peak of the 3 dimensions. So how could she possibly let such a superb opportunity slip by? All along this way, besides traveling and dealing with the dangers they faced, she had always been asking Dian for guidance in matters concerned with cultivation, and he'd obtained great gains and frequently felt enlightened. Fuse the Tao. She couldn't help but be slightly stunned when the condensing of laws was mentioned. Yes, Saint Immortal Realm experts must completely fuse the golden immortal laws they possess and transform it into a grand Tao of their own. Dian guided casually. The Saint Immortal Realm has already stepped onto the path that leads to becoming a god, and the reason a Saint Immortal can spread the Tao throughout the world is because a Saint Immortal possesses a grand Tao of his own. When one fuses the Tao, the more golden immortal laws one possesses, the greater its might would be. Similarly, the stronger the golden immortal laws contained within it were, the greater its might would be after it was fused into a grand Tao. After the Tao is fused, it's called Saint Tao laws. The Saint Tao laws possessed by ordinary Saint Immortal Realm experts are mostly fused with the 5 elements, yin, yang, wind, lightning, or other similar grand Tao laws as the primary grand Tao. For example, the fire Saint Tao, the water Saint Tao, and so on and so forth. When she spoke up to hear, Dian puckered her lips while looking at Shiryu and Xianxia that stood in the distance and said, "The first choice for disciples of Nuwas Tao Palace like them when they fused the Tao is the light Saint Tao. It is to completely fuse all the golden immortal laws they possess into the grand Tao of light, thus creating a light Saint Tao of their own. Because every single one of them possesses different golden immortal laws that are of varying strengths. Even though all of them possess the light Saint Tao, its might and attributes are completely different. In other words, after arriving at the Saint Immortal realm, the Saint Tao laws grasped by every Saint Immortal seem to have a similar name, yet they're all unique because it's your own Tao." After he heard Dian's explanation, she finally understood that cultivating in the Saint Immortal realm actually stressed upon so many things. "Then what about the Immortal King realm?" asked Shi. Dian couldn't help but smile when she heard this. The only method to advance into the Immortal King realm is to verify the Tao by utilizing the Saint Tao one possesses to seize karmic luck from the heavens. The stronger one's Saint Tao is, the greater one's karmic luck would be, and only then would one be able to step into the threshold of the Immortal King realm. As for cultivating in the Immortal King realm, it's extremely complicated to explain, and you'll naturally understand once you arrive at that realm. She nodded, and he couldn't help but sigh with emotion in his heart. On the path to the Grand Tao, it becomes more and more difficult and obscure the further one travels on it. Even though I've already attained perfection in the Golden Immortal Realm, I still haven't stridden through the thresholds of the Saint Immortal Realm and Immortal King Realm. I wonder how much time I'll have to spend and how much dangers I'll have to experience before I can attain this step. If I include the God-rank Realm of Legend, then I really don't know when I'll be able to attain it. Of course, the precondition to all of this is to survive. When I fuse the Tao, the more golden immortal laws I possess, the greater its might would be. Looks like I first have to condense all the grand Tao laws I possess into golden immortal laws, Xianxia pondered silently. As far as he was concerned, his path was extremely clear. Even if it was fusing the Tao, he would definitely completely fuse all the golden immortal laws he possessed into the talisman Tao and grasp a talisman Saint Tao of his own. Bang! Suddenly, a terrifying wave of the fluctuations of battle swept over from extremely far in the distance, and it caused the stars in the space around them to shake violently. Ha ha! There are actually immortal kings in battle. Yu, who was in the lead, stopped abruptly before he raised his head and looked far into the distance. His eyes surged with divine flames, and it seemed to see through the scenes behind the layer upon layers of space. Unfortunately, it isn't the sovereign sects Suiren Ting and Zhang Lingxiao. Xiangliu Li similarly looked towards the distance and puckered her lips while speaking with a slightly resentful tone. Even until now, she was still holding a grudge for the sovereign sect's ambush that day, so she naturally wished for nothing more than to see Suiren Ting and Zhang Lingxiao as soon as possible. Meanwhile, Dian Dian and Xianxia had stopped talking and looked over as well. Unfortunately, even if he utilized the Eye of Divine Truth, he was still unable to see the battle that was occurring far away in the distance. It wasn't that the Eye of Divine Truth was too weak, and it was his main body's body refinement cultivation that was too weak, and it caused the area he could view to be extremely limited. If it was his clone that utilized the Eye of Divine Truth, then the situation would be different. One of the parties to the battle is Qiu Qianlin, the master of one of the prehistoric sects, the Origin Clarity sect, and he's in existence at the Immortal King realm. He's a descendant of the primeval ferocious beast, the Devil Roar Dragon. Dian Dian explained to Xianxia in a low voice. As for the other party to the battle, it's the Integration sect's Heaven Trampler. Early on in the prehistoric times, the Integration sect was a colossus that could rival Nuos Dao Palace. One grasped light while the other grasped darkness. Unfortunately, the Integration sect suffered a great calamity when the three dimensions were established, and it fell into complete decline. Dian Dian completely didn't notice that when Xianxia heard the words Heaven Trampler, his expression had suddenly changed. As for the second half of what Dian Dian said, Xianxia didn't hear it at all. Heaven Trampler? Isn't that Zhen Liuqing's senior brother? What's he doing here? Could it be that he came for the secret to becoming a god as well? In an instant, countless thoughts flashed within Xianxia's mind. Wait, I know that old cow from the Integration sect. His strength is formidable to the point he's absolutely not someone that Devil Roar Dragon can suppress and pin down. Yet now, this old cow is actually slightly unable to resist that Devil Roar Dragon. In the front, Yu's brows suddenly raised as he seemed to have sensed something. Someone is helping from the shadows. Dian Dian and Xiangliu Li spoke simultaneously. Xianxia's heart couldn't help but constrict when he heard this, and he couldn't refrain himself and asked, "Can all of you help Heaven Trampler?" Swoosh! In the next moment, the gazes of everyone descended onto Xianxia in unison. Yu and Xiangliu Li revealed a wisp of astonishment, and they seemed to be slightly puzzled. Dian Dian, on the other hand, was clearly aware of why they would reveal such reactions, and she hurriedly sent a voice transmission to Xianxia. Did you forget what I said earlier? During the prehistoric times, the relationship between Nuos Dao Palace and the Integration sect was like the relationship between light and darkness. They opposed each other. Xianxia came to a sudden understanding, and he instantly realized that he'd spoken foolishly earlier. Heaven Trampler is from the Integration sect, yet I asked Yu and the others to help him. It was obviously foolish of me. However, to Xianxia's surprise, Yu seemed to as if he'd thought of something and said, "Brother Xianxia, you have a good relationship with that old cow?" Xianxia didn't conceal it and spoke truthfully. All those years ago when I was still in the mortal dimension, Heaven Trampler once helped me greatly. When they heard this reason, Yu and Xiangliu Li exchanged glances before they immediately nodded with smiles on their faces. Since it's like this, then we'll help him. Xianxia was stunned and slightly puzzled. Xiangliu Li smiled lightly and said instead, "Even though light and darkness have been unable to coexist since the ancient times, if there's no darkness, then how would there be light? Being on the opposite side doesn't necessarily mean that we're enemies." As she spoke, they'd already traversed the multicolored ocean of stars beneath them, and they were flashing over at extreme speed. Rumble. Terrifying fluctuations resounded through the chaotic space. As they grew closer, she finally clearly sensed that Heaven Trampler's figure that was as tall as the heavens was extremely far in the distance, and he was moving about between numerous stars. He held a dark and enormous axe in hand, and every single swing of the axe would definitely shatter numerous stars, causing them to explode with an extremely ferocious and oppressive impetus. His opponent was like a primeval devil roar dragon. Its entire body was pitch black, and it had long fangs and a terrifying appearance. Moreover, its height was actually comparable to Heaven Trampler. Obviously, this devil roar dragon was the master of Origin Clarity sect, Qiu Qianlin, that Dian Dian mentioned earlier. He held a golden trident, and it surged with golden radiance that swept towards the surroundings. He actually suppressed Heaven Trampler to the point of being unable to teleport. The scene before him was that of two imposing immortal kings battling in the boundless space, and the terrifying aftershocks from the battle shattered and destroyed the stars and meteors in an area of 500,000 kilometers, causing it to be an extremely shocking sight. However, it was obvious that Heaven Trampler was in a suppressed state. Every time he tried to break out of this situation, a shapeless force would entangle itself onto his body, causing him to be instantly suppressed once more. The state of the battle was extremely disadvantageous to him. Bang! Bang! The battle was intense, and various blazing light filled the surroundings. A battle between two immortal kings was a scene that could be described as capable of shacking the universe. You lousy devil roar dragon, you've been unable to best me for so many years. Yet you've actually found someone else to help you deal with me. You've really become capable. Heaven Trampler shouted loudly like a thunderclap. In his hand, the dark and enormous axe chopped horizontally to deal with all his opponent's attacks. Humph! Stupid cow. You've been hiding in the divine abyss of darkness all these years, and I was indeed unable to do anything to you while you had the protection of your master. But now that your master isn't around, let me see how long you can continue struggling for. Qiu Qianlin grunted coldly. As he spoke, his actions weren't slow at all. The golden trident gave rise to a myriad of layers of light and carried violent immortal king laws as it smashed down fiercely at Heaven Trampler. It forced Heaven Trampler to appear inferior in comparison, and he could only resist passively, causing him to be in a truly aggrieving situation. Wu Xianxia, get the fuck out here. Stop launching sneak attacks from the shadows like a coward. Heaven Trampler roared furiously. This battle was truly too aggrieving to him, and he was very clearly aware that if this continued, then he might really perish here. Hee. Stupid cow. It's no use no matter how you shout. This is the God Attainment region. The Heaven Dao here is in chaos and karma is hidden. It's impossible even for your master to come save you. Qiu Qianlin laughed coldly as his figure flashed, and the golden trident smashed down through the sky. Bang! A divine radiance tore through the sky, and it struck Heaven Trampler to the point his figure staggered back. Before the latter could make any reaction, the golden trident swept out horizontally once more. Rumble! It smashed onto Heaven Trampler's body, and it caused him to suddenly spit out a mouthful of brilliant gold blood. Damn it! Wu Xianxia, it's you again. I'll kill you, bastard. Even if I have to give up my life. Heaven Trampler was infuriated when he saw himself being struck to the point of spitting blood, and his eyes were bloodshot. He roared furiously like a divine ox and actually disregarded the pursuit of Qiu Qianlin as he turned around, and then he chopped down towards the space at the side with the dark and enormous axe in his hand. Swoosh! However, before his figure could move, a shapeless fluctuation arose abruptly, and it was like a gentle whip that confined his figure once more, causing him to miss before his attack could even be completed. Qiu Qianlin seized this opportunity to charge over explosively once more. His extremely robust figure crushed the stars before him, and the golden trident in his hand even surged explosively with a myriad of strands of golden radiance, causing the heavens and the earth to dim in comparison. Bang! A world-shaking collision resounded, and then Heaven Trampler's body shook as if he'd been struck by lightning. He spat out another mouthful of blood while his rugged face turned ghastly pale. However, his expression was frenzied as before. There's no need to struggle. If Wu Xianxia and I can't kill a stupid cow like you while working together, then we can directly knock a wall and take our own lives. Qiu Qianlin glanced arrogantly at Heaven Trampler, and then his figure charged once more while emanating rumbling. He seemed as if he intended to exterminate Heaven Trampler. Rumble. However, right at this moment, an extremely vast sword chi of light tore through the layers of space and passed through countless stars, and it carried a supreme might as it slashed down. Who is it? Qiu Qianlin was shocked. He couldn't be bothered to pursue Heaven Trampler, and he waved the trident to meet the wisp of sword chi head-on. Bang! Light erupted, and it was like two volcanoes had collided in midair, causing the impetus of it to be extremely astounding. Qiu Qianlin suddenly moved backwards from the force of the strike, and everywhere his figure passed, stars were crushed into pieces, while his expression was extremely unsightly. God Mystery Sword! He shouted with shock and fury, and he recognized the identity of the person that launched this attack. Swoosh! 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 Before he could launch a counterattack, 9 multicolored rays of immortal light tore through the sky. They swayed and seemed dreamlike as they swished over, and they actually bound Qiu Qianlin's figure that was tall like the sky. Nina Clarity Jade Crown! Qiu Qianlin cried out involuntarily with shock and fury once more, and a wisp of terror surged onto his face. His entire body shook, and he broke open the restraints of the 9 Clarity Divine Light before intending to flee. However, right at this moment, a violet battle axe that seemed like a crescent moon swished as it tore through the sky, and then it directly severed his throat at an unbelievably swift speed. Swish! A rain of golden blood covered the sky and rained down, whereas Qiu Qianlin, the master of Origin Clarity Sect and a descendant of the primeval Devil Roar Dragon, had perished on the spot. He's died instantaneously and without any room to struggle, because it was the joint attacks of 3 immortal kings that struck him earlier. This scene caused Heaven Trampler to be shocked, and then he came to a complete understanding. However, he couldn't be bothered about all of this at this moment, and he let out a savage laughter as he suddenly charged to the side. Wu Xianxia! Fucking continue hiding! Bang! The dark and enormous axe tore through the sky and forcefully tore open an enormous rift in space 500,000 kilometers away, and then a figure suddenly charged out from the end of the rift. This figure was practically translucent and shaped like a winding tree branch that swayed without end, and it was extremely strange. However, as soon as he appeared, he swiftly transformed into a middle-aged man with violet hair, violet lips, and in violet clothes. Obviously, he was Wu Xianxia. Humph! I'll let you off for now. The time we meet at the God Attainment Altar will be the time of your death. The violet-clothed middle-aged man grunted coldly before his figure flashed, and he actually flew through the sky. Bang! A strand of light sword chi, 9 multicolored immortal lights, and a violet battle axe appeared out of thin air at the same time, and they smashed down at him. Bang! The violet-clothed middle-aged man revealed a strange smile when facing these attacks, and then his figure shattered with a bang. His body transformed into a myriad of droplets of light that surged off in all directions. With the might of the joint attacks of Shiryu, Shangliu Li, and Dian Dian, they were merely able to destroy most of the droplets of light, and there was still a small portion that vanished in the boundless space. Heaven Trampler couldn't help but spit when he saw this, and he was slightly disgruntled. Big brother Heaven Trampler. Meanwhile, Shiryu and the others had rushed over, and Xianxia immediately moved over to greet Heaven Trampler. Alas, it really is you, little fellow. Why did you come here? Aren't you afraid of death? Heaven Trampler's figure flashed before he transformed into a 27 tall figure. He first took a glance at Shiryu and the others before his gaze descended onto the young man before him, and then his brows knit together as he let out a long sigh. Xianxia was stunned, as he'd never expected that the first thing Heaven Trampler would say after meeting him would be so blunt. However, he was able to discern that Heaven Trampler was concerned about his safety and had no ill intent. You old cow! We saved you, yet you don't even give us any thanks? Said Shiryu with a smile. Humph! If it wasn't for this kid, Would all of you help me? If I'm going to thank someone, then I should thank him. Heaven Trampler pointed at Chun Shi and spoke as a matter of course. Shiryu and Shangliu Li exchanged glances, and both of them were speechless. This old cow is actually still so unreasonable. Right. Big brother Heaven Trampler, why did you get into a fight with them? Chun Shi hurriedly changed the topic. He was able to discern that Heaven Trampler didn't really acknowledge Shiryu and Shangliu Li, so he was naturally unwilling to see them enter into an argument. On the other hand, from the beginning until the end, Dian Dian gazed at Heaven Trampler while seeming to be lost in thought and didn't say anything. Alas, the prehistoric sects have fallen into chaos. Heaven Trampler sighed, and he didn't conceal the reason at all. It turned out that along with the prehistoric ruins becoming the place where the upheaval of the three dimensions began, all the prehistoric sects were worried for their own safety and were anxiously choosing a method to escape calamity, so they placed their targets onto the outside world. Some sects intended to establish a new sect in the immortal dimension while some were roped in by the sovereign sect, and they chose to join the sovereign sect's forces. During this trip to the God Attainment region, those prehistoric sects that didn't join the sovereign sect suffered the full forced repression of the sovereign sect. For example, it was precisely under such circumstances that Heaven Trampler suffered the joint pursuit of Qiu Qianlin and Wu Xianxia that were respectively the masters of the Origin Clarity sect and Devil Spirit sect. These two powers had joined the sovereign sect. Shiryu and the others frowned when they heard this, and they felt the situation was slightly bad. Originally, Shiryu and the others thought that the sovereign sect had only sent Swearen Ting and Zhang Lingxiao here, and they would at most be able to obtain the cooperation of 2 or 3 prehistoric sects. Never had they imagined that the situation would actually be severe to such an extent. Exactly how many prehistoric sects have joined the sovereign sect's forces? Asked Shiryu with a frown. Heaven Trampler puckered his lips with a depressed expression and said, "If I knew, then how could I have possibly been deceived by those 2 bastards?" It turned out that he was suppressed earlier because he'd been deceived by Qiu Qianlin and Wu Xianxia, and he'd never expected that they'd sought refuge with the sovereign sect. So, he instantly fell into dire straits after being caught off guard by them. Looks like the situation really is bad. A wisp of a heavy expression filled the space between Shiryu's brows. Earlier, he was already aware that the Void Heaven sects Lu Qianchou and Myriad sects Bei Haolang were working together with the Sovereign sect to annihilate their group. However, in the end, they were sacrificed by Swearen Ting, and it almost allowed Swearen Ting to succeed in annihilating them. Now, if the immortal kings of a few more prehistoric sects were working together with the Sovereign sect, then it would truly be troublesome. That day, Chun Shi had helped them deal with the disaster that was about to take their lives. But what about the next time? However, according to my knowledge, there are roughly 9 prehistoric sects that have come to the God Attainment region this time. Besides the Integration sect that I represent, there are another 8 more prehistoric sects. Heaven Trampler knew that the situation was severe when he saw their brows knit together tightly, and he said immediately, "In the worst-case scenario, all of them are working together with the Sovereign sect. Wait, presently the masters of Void Heaven sect, Myriad sect, and Origin Clarity sect have fallen. So only 5 more prehistoric sects remain. Amongst these sects, we can confirm that the Devil Spirit sect's master, Wu Xianxia, has already joined the forces of the Sovereign sect. In other words, there are another 4 prehistoric sects that we can't distinguish which side they're on." Shangliu Li said in a light voice, "So according to the worst-case scenario, Swearen Ting and Zhang Lingxiao have at most roped in 5 more immortal kings." She paused for a moment and continued, "On the other hand, if we add fellow Taoist Heaven Trampler in, then we have 4 immortal kings. So even though the situation is severe, we may not necessarily be unable to resist them." After they heard Shangliu Li's analysis, Shiryu and Dian Dian nodded as well, and their expressions eased up greatly. Heaven Trampler puckered his lips instead and said, "When did I fucking say that I would work together with all of you? Big brother Heaven Trampler, if you act by yourself." Chun Shi spoke with worry. Before he could finish speaking, Heaven Trampler knew what he was about to say and instantly said angrily, all right, I'll listen to you, kid. All right?" Shiryu, Shangliu Li, and Dian Dian smiled. They were naturally able to discern that Heaven Trampler wasn't unwilling to agree to this, and he just didn't want to lose face, whereas Xianxia's words naturally gave him an opportunity to agree without losing face. After Heaven Trampler joined the group, they continued towards the depths of the God Attainment region. On the way, Xianxia couldn't help but ask Heaven Trampler about his father. However, Heaven Trampler's answer was slightly disappointing to Xianxia, because Heaven Trampler had only occasionally heard some information about Chun Lingjun a few years ago, and he didn't know of Chun Lingjun's exact whereabouts. This caused Xianxia to have no choice but to put this worry aside and ask about Jin Luqing and the others. They've all cultivated well. When you're returning to the immortal dimension, you can make a trip to the divine abyss of darkness, and you can naturally meet them there. Heaven Trampler didn't speak too much about them and just gave him a simple reply. All right. Xianxia nodded and went silent. He was able to sense that they were getting closer and closer to the God Attainment altar. So, Shiyu, Shangliu Li, Dian, and Heaven Trampler had become much more careful, and they naturally didn't have the time to bother about other trivial matters. 2 days later, we've arrived. Shiyu, who led the group, suddenly stopped moving, and he actually revealed a rare trace of burning anticipation. We've arrived? The spirits of everyone was refreshed, and they raised their heads in unison. The expanse of space in the distance was completely chaotic, and it enveloped their entire path forward. It was like the end of this expanse of space, and there was an ancient palace surprisingly standing within the chaotic mist. The palace was lofty and imposing, and it possessed a powerful aura. It possessed multiple layers of eaves, and it was like a pagoda that was formed from a single continuous beam. This ancient palace was extremely large, like a divine palace established within the chaotic mist. It towered into the sky while its surroundings were suffused with chaotic qi, and numerous dazzling and resplendent stars surrounded it while emanating blazing light. When looked at from afar, this palace was extremely lofty, sublime, and unreachable. When they stood before it, they were simply tiny like ants, and it was even to the extent they were even inferior to a tile of the divine palace. There was an arched bridge before the divine palace, and it formed a heaven ladder that linked this area to the divine palace. It was a true ladder of the heavens. Every single step seemed like an expanse of the heavens and the earth, and it rose up high to a height that aroused awe in the hearts of all. The God Attainment Palace. As they gazed at this ancient palace that seemed like a divine manifestation, Shiyu, Shangliu Li, Dian, and Heaven Trampler faintly revealed a trace of excitement at this moment. This was a mysterious and ancient place that had existed for countless years since the prehistoric times. Since the ancient times, it had drawn over innumerable immortal kings that intended to find the method to become a god and surpass the 3 dimensions. Presently, it had actually appeared before their eyes. Xianxia was similarly shocked speechless by this sight. This divine palace was too lofty and ancient, and when his gaze looked over at it from afar, he instantly felt as if he'd stepped into an independent world. Various strange and obscure auras assaulted his face, and they surged like the tide on an ocean. In an instant, Xianxia's entire body was bathed within the laws of the Heaven Tao, and the vital energy in his entire body was suppressed to the extreme. This was an almost suffocating feeling. It was like the grand Taos he possessed were like subjects that had encountered their king, and they were suppressed to the point of being unable to raise their heads before their king. However, right at this moment, the river diagram fragments in his sea of consciousness shook lightly in a casual manner, and an obscure fluctuation spread throughout his body. It instantly wiped out the uncomfortable feeling in him, allowing his entire body to feel relaxed. Merely taking a glance at it from afar almost suffocated me. Isn't the energy of the grand Tao within that divine palace too terrifying? Xianxia was astounded in his heart. He was naturally clearly aware that this was a place that only immortal kings could step foot on, and it would be strange if a golden immortal like him wasn't suppressed upon arriving here. This is the God Attainment Palace. According to legend, it's a divine treasure born within the chaos at the beginning of the world, and it was left behind by the chaotic Tao ancestor, Pangu. Only by passing through this palace will we be able to see the true God Attainment altar. Dian Dian's voice transmission sounded out by Chun Shi's ear. The chaotic Tao ancestor, Pangu. A wave of shock arose once more in Chun Shi's heart when he heard that this divine palace had such great origins because Pangu was the #1 expert when the world was created. Could it be that there's something to take notice of when passing through this palace? After he calmed down, Chun Shi acutely noticed that the expressions of Dian Dian and the others had calmed down, and even carried slight heaviness. Moreover, they weren't in a hurry to set out. Yes, the restrictions of the gods are set up outside the God Attainment Palace, and it isn't easy to pass through them. Dian Dian answered casually. The restrictions of the gods. Chun Shi couldn't help but sigh in his heart. That's a divine restriction that contains the energy of the gods. He was currently restrained by his cultivation, so no matter how high his attainments in the talisman Tao was, he was helpless against such divine restrictions. Humph! Looks like many people have indeed arrived before us. Right at this moment, Shiryu suddenly grunted coldly and said, "Come, let's head over first and see what ability our competition possesses." As he spoke, his figure flashed, and he led all of them directly towards the heaven ladder in the distance. When they stepped onto the first step of the heaven ladder, a terrifying force rumbled as it surged over. Shiryu was prepared long ago, and he withdrew the 5-color rock that swiftly created a barrier of light, and it directly resisted the terrifying fluctuation that assaulted them. If we weren't in a hurry, we could rely on the might of the restrictions on this heaven ladder to cultivate. The greater the pressure, the more of our potential will be stimulated. I heard Elder Su of the sect say that many great figures in history utilized the heaven ladder as a paradise to temper themselves, and they more or less obtained some benefit from it. Shiryu shook his head before his figure flashed, and he kept the 5-colored screen of light up as he flashed up the heaven ladder. Chun Shi couldn't help but be astounded when he heard this. Probably only immortal kings would dare do that. Because of the oppressive force of the divine restrictions and the heaven ladder being truly too high, Shiryu utilized the 5-color rock and led all of them up for the time for an incense stick to burn before they finally reached the end of the ladder. The end of the heaven ladder was a limestone path. It started from here and stretched all the way to the divine palace, and it was concealed within the chaotic mist. Gusts of cold wind blew by and dispersed the mist. The extremely ordinary limestone path emanated an ancient and desolate aura, and it seemed as if it had experienced the baptism of countless years. At this point, Chun Shi finally saw the God Attainment Palace clearly, and the first thing that entered his eyes was a resplendent and magnificent door that was inscribed with countless mysterious talismans. The talismans were extremely ancient and obscure, and they moved and twisted about like numerous tadpoles. Chun Shi was only able to faintly distinguish some words. Sky, ground, annihilate, restrict, destroy, seal, move, kill, fire. Chun Shi had actually never seen or heard of most of the other talismans, and they were like the language of gods. Besides that, the divine palace's walls, eaves, stone pillars, everything was forged from unknown divine rocks. After experiencing the corrosion of countless years, they still shone brilliantly and weren't tainted by dirt at all, and they emanated a solemn aura that aroused reverence in the hearts of all. Heaven Trampler, Nuwas Dao Palace's Shiryu and Xianxia Li? Midnight Immortal King? When Chen Shi's group appeared on the limestone path before the divine palace, a wave of surprised voices instantly resounded. After that, Chun Shi noticed that numerous figures were standing amidst the chaotic mist. There were around 5 of them. There were both men and women, and all of them possessed monstrous, imposing auras that were supreme like overlords. When he looked at them from afar, Chun Shi felt a piercing pain in his eyes. Obviously, this was a group of immortal kings. On the other hand, the expressions of Shiryu and the others sank slightly when they saw this group of people. They noticed that the sovereign sects Swearenting and Jiang Lingxiao weren't amongst them. It was even to the extent that the devil spirit sects Xianxia, who was almost jointly annihilated by them, wasn't there either. But according to Xianxia Li's analysis from before, amongst the members of the prehistoric sect that had come to the God Attainment region, and besides those that had already fallen, there were only 4 prehistoric sects which they were unable to determine if these sects had joined forces with the sovereign sect. Yet the scene before their eyes had already exceeded the number of 4. Simply speaking, the number of immortal kings that had come to seek the god attainment altar this time had exceeded their previous estimations. Old monkey, why haven't all of you gone in? Heaven Trampler spoke with a rumbling voice while his gaze shot towards one of the immortal kings there. This immortal king had a thin figure, a sharp mouth, a chin that was like that of an ape, and eyes that surged with a bright light and revealed a ruthless and wild expression. At the same time, Heaven Trampler sent a voice transmission to the others. That old monkey is an independent cultivator from Hollow Ice Mountain, and he's called Sun Wuhan. The other 5 people by his side are all the masters of various prehistoric sects. Actually, there was no need for him to introduce the others because sure you and the others roughly recognized them. After all, it wasn't their first time here at the prehistoric ruins. Coupled with all of them being immortal kings as well, a brief deduction would allow sure you and the others to roughly guess their origins. However, it was impossible to determine exactly how many amongst these 6 immortal kings had sided with the sovereign sect. 3 old geezers have already died miserably in there just now. So would anyone dare go in rashly without a certain level of confidence? When Sun Wuhan, who Heaven Trampler called Old Monkey, heard this, he spoke with disdain. Some have already died in there? Sure you and the others were shocked in their hearts, and their expressions became heavy because those experts were immortal kings, and the death of every single immortal king was sufficient to cause a mighty uproar in the 3 dimensions. Presently, 3 immortal kings had actually perished in the God Attainment Palace, so how could they not be shocked? Oh? Which unfortunate fellows were they? Heaven Trampler seemed to be rather familiar with Sun Wuhan and continued. The Dark Cloud sect's Fu Xiaoqian, the Old Bear from White Emperor Ridge, and Wu Xianxia from the Devil Spirit sect. Sun Wuhan answered casually. Wu Xianxia. Sure you and the others were slightly stunned once more when they heard this name. Did they enter along with the sovereign sects Swearin Ting and Zhang Lingxiao? Xiangliu Li couldn't restrain herself from asking this question. I don't know. Sun Wuhan was stunned when he heard the words sovereign sect. And then he shook his head. It was a mystery if he really didn't know or he was feigning ignorance. They were together indeed. Right at this moment, a gray-robed and dignified middle-aged man spoke in a deep voice. When I arrived here, I just happened to see them entering the God Attainment Palace together. Sure you raised his eyes and looked over, and he instantly recognized the gray-clothed and dignified middle-aged man as the master of Upper Sky Palace, Ranfeng. So besides those immortal kings that have perished, Swearin Ting and Zhang Lingxiao have passed through the God Attainment Palace and arrived at the God Attainment altar? Xiangliu Li asked with a frown on her face.